All right, good evening, and welcome to the movie discussion pocket dimension where time does not exist, and the only thing that matters is film. I'm Cole, joined by Jay. We're here tonight. We missed last week, didn't we?
No, I think a week before.
Or it was the week before, okay. What was the last thing we did? How come, what's wrong with my brain? I can't remember.
12 Monkeys.
Right, we did 12 Monkeys, right. Yeah, so it wasn't that long ago. Yeah, 12 Monkeys was a fun one. One that we probably meant to do a lot earlier, and it just got pushed back a bunch of times, so when our plans, which were something else, fell through, 12 Monkeys was a good thing to fill the void, because we both wanted to do it for a while. And tonight's episode is the Black Cauldron from 1985, and there's a lot that I've wanted to say about it. So I will just, and I know sometimes when there's a lot of information, especially historical context, which I love to blab on about, I know sometimes I have a tendency to sort of rush, so we're just going to take it slow. There's no hurry, there's no rush, and get it out there. So obviously this is the first film in Disney's animated canon that we're doing, and it should be for obvious reasons why that is, because the vast majority of those films are extremely well known, extremely popular, were very successful, and many considered classics. But, and that's not really what we're trying to do on the show. Talk about stuff that's really mainstream and popular anyway, and that's what makes this one different. The Black Cauldron from '85 represents maybe the lowest point of the Disney animated canon.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a number of reasons for that, which we can get into. But
it's a very, very odd time for Disney, right? Like this is kind of like right before they had their, Renaissance.
Exactly, right? So you'd say the Renaissance, basically, you could say this was like the absolute low point. Everything that happened afterwards was sort of like a build up to the Renaissance. You said the Renaissance is more or less the end of the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
So the 80s in general was a really weird decade for Disney. And we'll go back a little further because that's what I do. So let's go back to 1966, and Walt Disney dies. The last movie he has direct involvement with comes out the next year, that being The Jungle Book. That's the last movie that would have any of Walt's fingerprints on it. Going into the 70s, now his brother Roy is in charge, but then Roy dies. Roy dies in 70 or 71. So now the CEO of Disney is Ron Miller, who is Disney's son-in-law. And also in the 70s, what's happened is there's a lot of turnover in the animation department, because I'm sure anybody that's a scholar of Disney or interested in the animation knows that from its very beginnings and right through its sort of golden age of all those big classic movies that Disney, of course, had direct involvement with, there were also a group of animators he referred to as the 9 old men. And these were the guys. And from any movie from basically the start right up into the 60s, always had the involvement of at least 4 or 5 of them. But they were getting old, and I don't remember when certain ones died, but they were retiring and stuff like that, because that's what they were. They were already old, and that's what Disney called them. So in the 70s, we're starting to see the beginning of needing some turnover. We'll come in with this movie. So this movie is actually based on a series of fantasy novels by, I have it here, author Lloyd Alexander. They were called The Chronicles of Pedrian. Pedrian. There were 5 books in the series, and this movie basically is sort of a condensed version of, I guess, what happens in the first 2. So as early as 1971, Disney, Miller, they want to do these books, and they don't actually wind up getting the rights till 73. So in the 70s now, no production work goes on the movies, but whatever is the very earliest preliminary stuff happens sort of on and off through the 70s. Meanwhile, in the 70s, Disney, the turnover has really affected it. So now Disney is releasing some, has continued releasing its animation films, and obviously other films too. We're concentrating on the animation, but they're no longer the giant hits they were, even if they're pretty good and fairly successful. And I think there's still quality there. For instance, I think 1973 is the Robin Hood movie with the animals. That to this day is my favorite version of Robin Hood. I'm not kidding. I love that movie, and I love it. You had the Rescuers in 77. You had
Down Under.
Down Under came a lot later though.
Oh, was it?
Yeah,
90s?
1990. Yeah. Rescuers Down Under, just to do a little digression, is weird too because it's sort of like a weird interruption at the beginning of the, if you want to say the real beginning of the Renaissance, because a lot of people think, well, 89, Little Mermaid, right? It's like, oh, Little Mermaid gets things going. And the 1990 is almost sort of overlooked because that's when they're doing a rare thing, which is a sequel, which is not something they usually do. They would, of course, years later pump out direct-to-video sequels, but they were, lower quality and not part of the official canon. So that made it sort of a rare movie. And it was actually pretty revolutionary because it used a lot of computer graphics that they would really rely on going forward, particularly in Beauty and the Beast and so forth. And tying back to this movie, The Black Cauldron is a couple firsts. And we'll talk about the other later. But one of the first is this is the first Disney animated feature-length film to use any sort of CGI. It was in production around the same time as The Great Mouse Detective, but it came out a year before The Great Mouse Detective and beat it to the punch. So it does have that distinction of being first. But anyway, back in the 70s, so they'd done some various things, and kind of like what had happened in the 40s, although for much different circumstances. So in the 40s, of course, with World War II happening, a lot of the key people at Disney were actually involved in the war. And the studio, despite the fact having like that massive hit with Out of Nowhere, just revolutionizing the whole industry and shocking the world with the very first one, Snow White. And then they did a couple more, Dumbo and Bambi. But once we get into World War II era, you'll notice that the feature-length films stop, and instead what you get are the so-called package films, which are just basically, several shorter animated features, put together in the so-called package to make a movie. And, stuff like Three Caballeros, Make Mine Music, Melody Time. And then there's one that's only two, which is like the Mr. Toad and Sleepy Hollow one, which is just two. But a lot of the other ones were like, 6 or 7 or even more. And sometimes they'd have what was another one? I can't think. Fun and Fancy Free, which I've talked about before on this because I was so blown away when I finally, in getting Disney Plus, saw the actual original version of it because I'd always seen it in pieces. But anyway, Disney was doing finally, but they weren't that profitable. And then in the 50s, that's when Disney sort of established itself for real. Finally, they were on top and they were definitely profitable. They were growing and expanding. Walt himself was of enormous influence and power, and he was not just an animator or an artist. He was a businessman with a lot of ambitions, which of course leads to the opening of Disneyland and later Disney World as it expands. But anyway, so in the 70s, Disney's losing that foothold a little bit. And so they've done some movies there, and one of them is, again, kind of reminiscent of the package movie. They do the mini adventures of Winnie the Pooh, which is not really a feature-length film. It's several smaller episodes put together. But anyway, there was sort of a bright spot in the 70s for Disney, which was they had recruited somebody new who was considered like a really great talent. Like, this was a guy that maybe could take them into the 80s and establish them going forward. And I'm sure people know the name. His name was Don Bluth. And Don Bluth was vastly talented and vastly influential. And he worked on all those movies I mentioned. He even did Pete's Dragon. But he also worked on, because that has animated sequences, Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, Rescuers, and the other one I said, Robin Hood. He worked on all those. And it was sort of seen that he was kind of the future, that he was going to take the lead. But he was also sort of a divisive figure because he wasn't really happy because he was noticing sort of the direction Disney was going with. And he wanted sort of a return to that sort of grand classical style they had. And he clashed with a lot of people over this. But he was also, even though this is the beginning of when we're first hearing about Don Bluth, he wasn't as young as he sounded. He was already in his late 30s by this point. So there were a lot of younger people working with him and under him. And I don't want to use the word cult or anything, but he was divisive in the fact that there were certain people that thought, this is the guy. I'm going to follow him and do whatever he does because he's so great. And then there were people that didn't believe that and didn't like him. And it all came to head in 1979 when he turned 42 on his 42nd birthday. He left because he was like, I guess he thought Disney has lost its way, and he had these plans that they weren't in favor of or whatever to form his own animation studio. And he took quite a few animators with him because, like I said, so this is a big tipping point for Disney going into the 80s.
He did what, The Wizard? First thing?
No, his first one is still my favorite one, which was The Secret of NIMH.
Okay.
So that's 82. So one of the things that he did in leaving was, which wasn't actually that big of a success, but it was still pretty good. I mean, the sex-wise, I think it's an amazing movie. In fact, it's one of my favorite. But anyway, and then he had several other fairly successful films in the 80s. An American Tail, In the Land Before Time. So one of the other things he established was this is the first time Disney actually had direct competition when it came to making feature full-length movies, animated movies, because there really wasn't any before that. I mean, a movie popped out here and there, and if you want to talk about somebody else that did consistently make those movies in that era, of course, we've covered him before, Ralph Bakshi. But Ralph Bakshi was not exactly seen as any sort of competition for Disney. One, because he did not make anything that was fairly family friendly. That was not his intention. And two, he never had very much money or success. It was always one movie to the next, just barely making it. It was always such a huge struggle to get his movies out. And we talked about him on our show because we've done two of his movies. We did Wizards, which came out in 1977, and then we did Fire and Ice, which was 1983. And like most of his movies, they're probably not 100% the way he envisioned them, just because of the economic constraints. So he did the best he could with what he had. So he was not really direct competition for Disney, but Bluth Studio was, and because that was a good thing, because maybe it still whipped Disney into shape. So it's 1980 now, and they finally start production on this movie, The Black Cauldron. And right off the bat, there's all sorts of problems. And it's not long before it gets sort of pushed aside, and its original date gets taken over by another movie they were working on called The Fox and the Hound, which came out in 1981. So once The Fox and the Hound is over in 1981, Disney's full focus is on The Black Cauldron. There's no more full feature-length animated films. And originally, it's going to be released in Christmas of 1984, but again, they're running into some problems here. And there's quite a bit of turnover with the staff. Various people were hired and worked on it and then either left of their own volition or were fired. And some of these people came from outside of Disney. They hired Rosemary Ann Sisson, who was a well-known British writer who'd done quite a few successful novels and screenplays. But somewhere into production, she started clashing with producer, I think it was John Hale, about stories. So she left due to creative differences. Various other people worked on it and were either just replaced or left on their own because of this. The original director left and was replaced by the two directors that had co-directed the previous film, The Fox and the Hound, and that's what they would do in this. They would do that. But it started with but the main project head was animator John Musker, and he was really the driving force behind what happened in the early 80s for it. And he himself had some problems with stuff that was going on, and he was looking at various artwork and stuff. In fact, a young Tim Burton had done various character designs and things on this movie, and Musker threw them out because he didn't like them. And Burton would wear out his welcome within another year anyway, making the short film Frankenweenie, which horrified the executives at Disney, and they sent him packing, which is funny because nowadays they're proud of the work he did and they even show it. But at the time, he was persona non grata. And so that's the other thing, right? So the mid-'80s is also when two huge figures, Jeffrey Katzenberg and Michael Eisner, come on board. And they're going to and Katzenberg in particular is going to have a profound effect on Disney going forward, coming out of the 80s, and on this movie in general, because it was really the first major thing they were doing under his supposed leadership, right? So it was really important to him. So now Disney has this weird divide where they still do have a number of animators from the older days, and a number of executives, of course, from there too. But they've got this whole new sort of fresh generation that joined at the start of the 80s. And these are people that were for the first generation that really grew up watching Disney movies and having, the dream. This is the first time we have people that were like fans that got into something that, sorry, I'm not tripping over my words, but you know what I mean. This is the first generation that had really grown up as fans of Disney, and now they were part of it. They were super excited and very enthusiastic about it, but there was a big there was a big divide between them and management, or the upper brass, whatever. Whereas the upper brass saw them as sort of spoiled and entitled, and that they were trying to push things too much, and that they hadn't earned anything, and they were trying to they were all caught up in the excitement and wonder or whatever of Disney, but they weren't towing the line. Whereas, of course, the animators themselves saw the brass as overly oppressive and resistant to change, etc. And that's going to help tear this movie apart, because what happens is both sides are pushing for sort of their own kind of version of the movie, and neither ends up getting what they want. They just get sort of a compromise. So you see how this movie was kind of doomed from the get-go because of these factors.
So when you suggested doing this movie, probably years ago now at this point, I didn't realize that it was animated. I thought it was live action for some reason, but I have seen this film quite a few times now that I've seen it again. When I was a kid, I remember all the characters and just how dark it was, and I liked that part of it, but I still didn't like to watch the movie. I don't know what it is. It's something about the pacing, it's just boring. Even though it looks cool, it's just.
I was going to say that my favorite part is definitely the visual. It looks great, right? It has one of the best visual styles in Disney. I really love the art and presentation. But like you said, and we will come around to it again later when it comes in. But one of the reasons I think is because this winds up getting heavily cut and revised. Katzenberg in particular is responsible for this because he really didn't like it. And of course, we'll get into it too, that there was a very sort of infamous screening that went with a rough cut on the movie that went very poorly.
Yeah. So it was, this is PG, right? What it was.
So that's the other first. Right. So this is the other first. This is the first animated film that was PG. And that was on purpose. So getting back to what I said about this new crop of animators, they were, it has nothing really directly to do with Ralph Bakshi, but okay. So many times we've talked about, so this is Disney's Dark Age. So this is Disney's Dark Age, and we lead into the Disney Renaissance, right? And they would both kickstart the wider thing. The Disney Dark Age was also within just the Western Dark Age of animation, which was a pretty long period, really. It was basically from the 60s well into the end of the 80s. And it was none, and I'm not, before people misunderstand the term, it doesn't mean nothing of quality was produced then. But it was definitely a time when Western animation was produced on the cheap, and not a lot of time, effort, or money was put into it. It was full of limited animation. It was full of repeated stuff, backgrounds being used over again. And so all sorts of cartoons from the 60s, 70s, and most of the 80s are kind of shoddy. And that's on purpose, because the people, not that the people behind them didn't put any effort into it, but maybe what was behind that was just okay, relax, this is for kids. It doesn't have to be important. And that was really in the West, because as we see, animation was much more respected even early on, just like comics were respected early on in Japan. And the two would eventually merge. But anyway, so the animation, the Dark Age also leads to what's known as the animation age ghetto, which you talked about before, which is because of the success of Disney in previous decades, just establishing these really successful animated films that were family friendly, that locked them in place. Everybody thought animation is simply for kids. And of course, you have a rebel like Bakshi coming out in the late 60s, early 70s saying animation is a medium. It can be anything. It's not just for kids. But he's kind of a smaller voice at the time. So even though many times when I've talked about the animation age ghetto, when I say a big reason for it is because of Disney, the fact is here in the mid 80s, in making the Black Cauldron, this new generation of animators, they specifically are aware of this situation, and they want to be part of the way to break out of it. What they're saying is, we want to show that animation can be more adult and mature, and we want to do it right here with a Disney movie. And so it was very much on purpose that Black Cauldron was darker and more mature or whatever, and had the PG rating. They wanted that, and it was, I guess, a risk that, and of course, it wound up backfiring. But I don't think it really did backfire in that way. But that's the way Katzenberg and Eisner and other executives saw it. They thought, okay, it was a big mistake to try to make things darker. And I think as we get into the movie, I don't know if either of us agrees with that. I don't think that was the problem with the movie, and I don't think you think that either. So, kind of lost my train of thought there.
So I was just kind of looking through here, I was wondering who exactly was Disney's competition, late 70s, 80s. I know Warner Brothers put out the occasional film, but maybe Hanna-Barbera, the occasional,
right. The thing is, they didn't have any real competition, right? And somebody like Bakshi is an anomaly, and and he's playing to a different market anyway. So they really didn't have any. It wasn't until Bluth established his studios and started making several really quality and well received movies in the 80s, and that helped whip them back into shape. So yeah, they were kings, and they didn't have competition as far as
you mentioned Land Before Time and like Fievel. Is Fievel Goes West or whatever, one of those?
Fievel Goes West is a little later, but but the original Fievel, the original American Tale. Yeah, so those three movies all came in the 80s, and Fievel Goes West is kind of crappy, came out in 91, but still did pretty well, I guess. And I think that's kind of the end of, well, we'll have to talk about Bluth sometime. I think Bluth started out great and then went off a cliff. I think his early movies, his first movie is fantastic. His next two are quite good, and then it just turns into garbage. But anyway.
I was just curious. So, I mean, in United States, they basically had no competition.
Right.
So,
or in the West in general, really.
I mean, it's all like Asian movies is what I'm seeing. Like Japan's putting out a ton of feature length.
Right, and they made no impact over here at the time. Right, nobody knew them. Right. It wasn't until Akira in '88 even caused a little bit of a blip, and all through the '90s, that was when we finally had the anime boom to a certain extent. But even to this day, anime is it's not, as far as feature full length films go, it's still not considered competition. So Bluth was really the only one, and as I said, it was a good thing because it did make Disney get their act together to a certain extent.
Yeah, because American Tail, Land Before Time, those had to have been very successful.
Yeah, they were.
Because I know I saw both in the theater.
I think Land Before Time is the second movie I ever saw in theater. And it's also the first movie I ever saw in theater that was current at the time. So I think the first movie I ever saw in theater was in '87, was a Disney film. It was a reissue of Bambi. I saw it, yeah. So I'm pretty sure those are the first two films I ever saw. So they were both animated features, although one was from the '40s, and then the other was Land Before Time by Bluth, which I still adore that movie. But Bluth has an overly sort of sappy style that he used to balance, but then he just got to a point where that was the whole thing. There wasn't anything to balance it anymore. But anyway, back to this movie. So very troubled production, lots of turnover, lots of infighting and stuff throughout '84. They're realizing even a Christmas '84 release is out of the question. So now they have to shoot for somewhere at '85. So this thing has been in actual production for over four years now, and you've got the clash between the two groups again: the less experienced animators and the older, more experienced animators, plus the brass, as I said. So they were also always sort of in conflict with each other. And as we said, that really sort of winds up showing up on the screen. So then we'll get to I might as well get to it. So they did a test screening sometime in late '84 with a rough cut in Burbank, and I guess it really it scared the children, is what it was. It was so dark, particularly towards the end with the whole Cauldron undead army coming out. It actually caused several children to actually flee the theater, according to what I've read several sources on. So it must be true, because I actually read because when I read it in one, I was like, okay, maybe. I looked up several other articles, and they do say that children actually fled the theater in terror. So anyway, Katzenberg has become studio chairman recently, and he has to assert his authority, right? So he says he wants cuts. He wants big cuts. And so Joe Hale, so that's the guy I meant to say, not John Hale. Joe Hale. He's sort of the one constant throughout this. He was a producer from very early on. He's one of the only guys that was there pretty much start to finish, and had a big influence on the movie. Because we had other people that came and went, and then we had other people that came and actually worked on the movie, but they came in a lot later. Hale was sort of there for the whole time. Anyway, Hale, of course, was pretty much against this, but Katzenberg said, we're really going to eliminate our main audience with all this scary stuff in here. And so those two clashed over that for a while. And Hale eventually went over Katzenberg's head and told Eisner, who was now the newly installed CEO. And Eisner managed to convince Katzenberg to at least not do quite the brutal edits he had in mind, but still, obviously, he still did something. Katzenberg requested that the film be modified And then they delay the Christmas release to summer of '85. So anyway, they wound up cutting about 15 minutes out of it, and it's pretty cool. I haven't looked it up here, but I've seen it before. You can find some of the imagery that was cut out, and it looks badass and awesome. And it sucks that they cut it out, but again, it's because a lot of scary undone soldiers and stuff like that. So a lot of that stuff wound up getting cut out, and then they're like, there was actually scenes where Taran manages to kill some of the Horn King's guards, like, which would have been good, because you know what Taran really does in this film? Almost nothing. Because we're going to talk about problems with the film. One is we have a very passive cast. They almost do accomplish. They wind up winning in the end, but they almost do it by doing nothing. They get captured. They run away. They get captured again. The Horn King more or less kills himself. Like they're not proactive. They don't do anything. But in the original cut, at least Taran and some of them do stuff, and it gets cut out. So so that's one of the main problems with the thing there. Like you said, it's boring. It's boring because they're not accomplishing anything. So we have like our little ragtag group, and usually, which we've seen in many movies, right? And the idea is, none of them are warriors, none of them are sorcerers. They're but we've seen movies like that before, and they still muddle their way through, and they make a contribution. Like for instance, the old guy, the bard or whatever, he doesn't do anything. Like in these types of movies, usually, even when you have like a silly character that like is there for comic relief, they have like one moment where they do something useful for the quest. Right. He doesn't do anything useful in this quest. Like the one thing he does is like he bargains with the witches a little bit, but who gives a shit, So yeah. So apparently they used to be a bit more proactive in the movie and do a few things. There was also a part where Elenwe, who we'll have to talk about a bit too, gets her dress torn, and they cut that too, because I guess she's partially nude from it or something. I don't know. There was a whole scenes involving the fairies that were cut, and of course the thing that got cut the most was the Horn King stuff and the Cauldron Born stuff. Like that was like cut down to almost nothing.
Like the climax?
Yeah, it's like the main climax of the movie, and they make it almost nothing. Like there's one good shot of them emerging from the cauldron, and that's like it. But apparently there was way more of that, including, again, Taran doing some fighting, those things ravaging the countryside, all gone, all cut.
I feel like that's got to be a large part of the problem here, right? Like they just cut out the plot. So, they cut it down to nothing. So, surely it would have been better with that stuff added back in.
Yeah, it says right here. Let's see here. One scene featuring one of the Horn King's henchmen being mauled by one of the Cauldron-born warriors, which causes him to form horrifically detailed lacerations and boils before he rots away and becomes one of the Cauldron-born warriors. That would have been cool. That's gone. They even say a more action-oriented, dramatic, and intense climactic fight scene between Taran and the Horn King before the latter is sucked into the cauldron. See, that's how you make a movie. Yeah. What do we get? We have him like staggering towards Taran. Taran holds onto the wall and sort of pushes him off, and that's the end of it. That's the big climactic ending. It's terrible, but so yeah, they didn't write it that way, and they didn't even animate it that way. It got cut out.
It was a failure, right? And all, monetarily, it was a failure. So
right. So this is a huge failure, and this is again, but they read into it for the wrong reasons. They think it was because of that. So the film's budget was, they thought it was because it was too dark. So the film's budget was originally supposed to be $25 million. It wound up going over budget to $44 million, which made this the most expensive animated film of all time. And then at the box office, it makes less than half that. And in the ultimate insult, it is beaten by what is not considered its competition, the Care Bears movie. Mm-hmm. The Care Bears movie with all its, with no money or effort, or a perfect example of the dark age of animation of here's just shit something out and with terrible quality. And we've got this richly animated, beautifully scored Disney movie with even some computer effects in it, and it loses to the Care Bears, and you kind of understand why. Because everything that was interesting and solid about the movie was hacked out of it.
But, let's say, it obviously failed in this form. So what if it had gotten, a PG-13 rating and went to the theaters like that? Obviously it wouldn't have done well, but, hell, in that format, it may have been, really good, to, fans of, heavy metal and stuff like that,
Right. It says right here, had it not went through many last-minute drastic changes, The Black Cauldron would have held the distinction of being the only full-length Disney animated feature film and the first film released under Walt Disney Presents banner to be rated PG-13 or even R. After months of hard work, the final film ultimately received a PG rating from the MPAA, the first for a Disney animated feature, and the only one until that movie Dinosaur, which came out in 2000, which nobody remembers.
Yeah, it wasn't good. I mean, hindsight, though, I mean, doesn't that sound like it would have been a better choice? I mean, because hell, it may actually be like, I know this film has kind of got a cult following now, but I mean, really for the wrong reasons, right? I mean,
exactly. And it's funny. It's interesting when you were saying like you hadn't realized it was animated, but then you remembered that you'd seen it.
Oh, yeah. Because
I didn't see it. So this is a movie that for many years I heard of, but it was almost like Disney buried it.
Yeah.
They were so, ashamed of its failure, because I've talked many times about growing up having Family Channel, which was the Disney Channel in the early 90s. And that's how I got to see a lot of stuff. Nothing about the Black Cauldron. And the Black Cauldron through the 90s was just a complete non-entity that I heard about. It wasn't on, it got released, I got a small video release in 1998. So that's 13 years after the movie came out. And now, of course, sometime during the 2000s, it had a bit of a, as we said, a cult following building. Ironically, during what is sometimes called Disney's second dark age, which is basically the years between 2000 and 2009, roughly, when they weren't doing great quality and when they were sort of hemming and hawing about whether or not they were going to keep doing 2D hand-drawn animation or just go full 3D, which is what they wound up doing after 2009.
Princess and the Frog.
Yeah. Man, that movie gave me hope and then just dashed it all, because it was just like, well, we're not doing that anymore. Because as I've said many times, one of my favorite things in the world is hand-drawn animation. I love it. So this is a movie that they just basically buried. And that's why I was thinking about it ever since we did another movie that was sort of similar several years ago. We did The Black Hole, which also has black in the title. But it's interesting. They're both movies that came from the same era, both have black in the title, and both held the distinction of being PG movies that were a bit darker and spectacularly failed. Now, in the case of Black Hole, it's just a dull, kind of crappy movie, right? Like, they were trying to do Star Wars, but they were also trying to do make it a little more serious and kind of like a wonder type thing with like a, what am I trying to say? Space Odyssey 2001 sort of vibe. And it's just this flat, boring, forgettable movie. And yet I did see that growing up because Family Channel did show it. In fact, as I said, the circumstances I saw it under was they re-aired it with the special that originally came out beforehand, because it was a big deal at the time back in 79 before it came out, because it was like, this is Disney's first attempt to make like a big sort of sci-fi thing in the thing, So they had an hour-long special about it called Major Effects that you can find parts of on YouTube. Unfortunately, not the whole thing. It's really great. It has the actor from the movie, although I didn't realize at the time. I think you pointed out to me, Jay, that it was the same actor that's in the movie. I had no idea, pretending to be a superhero called Major Effects, and he would talk about not just the advanced and amazing effects this movie was going to have, but also a look back at how Disney had used special effects through the years in their other movies. And it's a really fun special. But the movie itself is, as we talked about, you can look for that episode. But anyway, ever since that episode, it reminded me, oh, yeah, there's another thing kind of like that from a few years later, but part of the animated Black Cauldron. So it wasn't until Disney Plus became available that really I had any hope in hell of finding it without, just having to settle for some not probably good quality version online somewhere on my laptop. And that really, in going through Disney Plus and realizing Black Cauldron was there, that really lit a fire under me. Cauldron metaphor implied to do this movie, because I've always been interested in it. So I have seen it before. This isn't the first time I've seen it, but it's hard to remember the circumstances I did see it under. And it wasn't that long ago. I definitely wasn't a kid. Never saw this as a kid. Heard about it, read some things about it, things here and there, and I don't know, maybe on some like Disney specials, they might have even shown a small clip or two of it, but usually just to point out that it was a failure or something.
I don't know how the hell I saw it. I don't know where I watched it, but because it wasn't released in any home video format. So
right, and here's the other thing that on like various channels. So during the 90s and the Disney Renaissance is in full swing, obviously you couldn't see the movies that were brand new, like they weren't on TV, but all sorts of other ones are. And as time has gone by, those movies are all on TV. Many times I've come across things like Mulan, Lion King, Hercules. They've all played on TV. This never plays on TV. It didn't back then, and it doesn't now. So, props to Disney for at least putting it on Disney Plus, only because Disney Plus includes pretty much everything except for their other sort of forgotten thing, although for very different reasons, which you talked about, Song of the South. But yeah, Black Cauldron. So I'm just going to say, despite all its flaws, I still like it. This is one of those movies where like I can see all the flaws. They're right there in front of me and I get them, but I still kind of like it anyway. Like not to the same extent as some of the others. Like the ultimate example I talked about is probably Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers. Like, they do so much wrong in that movie. They fuck with the story, and so much of it's stupid. And I just really like that movie. It's one of my favorite Halloweens. And a lesser example is probably what's it called? From Ridley Scott. The sort of supposed aliens prequel type thing.
Oh, Prometheus?
Prometheus. See, I get everything that's wrong with Prometheus, and I still kind of like that movie too. In fact, I even own it. I feel kind of the same way about Black Cauldron. Everything that was sort of good about it was pretty much sucked out of it, and we're left with a fairly hollow, bland, forgettable story with boring characters that do almost nothing. But it has some saving graces. One, of course, the artistic style in the world is great. It's it looks wonderful. It's top-notch animation, of course, being Disney. It also has a really underrated soundtrack, which was another thing that got cut. The soundtrack was so good, and most of it didn't even appear in the movie after the cuts were made. But unlike the movie, it actually got a full soundtrack release, so you could buy that on CD in the years afterwards, and it's been considered like one of the better Disney soundtracks. So here's another thing that also made Disney nervous was the fact that not only were they going for a darker, more serious tone, but there weren't any songs in this movie. This wasn't a musical. Usually most of their, big blockbuster successful animation movies are musicals. And this wasn't. And they thought, oh, that's a big mistake too. So after that, they definitely stuck with music for the next while to greatest impact, always. And I mean, it's good. They've always had good songs. But I just mean, I feel so bad for some of the animators that worked on this and some of the other people too, because I think they were really trying to prove a point. It's like, we don't need to have like a musical. We can make a song one where people don't break into song. And I'm not anti-musical. I like lots of musicals, and I like a lot of those Disney ones that fall. Some very great, memorable, popular songs. But when they were also sorry, got it.
So when they're done well, they're good, but there's a lot of bad ones, and
sure,
I didn't actually notice that until I was reading some of the trivia that this is one of the first that has no musical, right? It has no musical at all. It just has the score.
Yeah, and it's considered a very good score by composer Elmer Bernstein. Pretty well-known guy. Score for the Black Cauldron was for Bernstein what Mulan was for Jerry Goldsmith in the next decade. A fascinating journey into a fresh realm that required its music to play a more significant role in the film. That's true. When you hear the music, it's really good, but the film is short and repeats some of the music and doesn't take full advantage of it. So, super flawed movie, but something I find interesting. I almost never eat chocolate anymore, but I'm trying to get some energy, so some chocolate. Hopefully I'm not chewing too loudly.
Yeah, it just makes me wonder, like, if they had just released it, flat out PG-13, if that may have been a more successful route to go. I mean, it wouldn't have made its money back, obviously, but I mean, it may have found a audience,
And I really think that was the intent when they were making it.
Maybe
I think there was a lot of miscommunication again between the craft, because I think all along they were like, as I said, this younger generation of animators, that's sort of what they were out to prove. They were trying to say, we want to tell a more mature, not, it's not super adult, but more, the usual thing Disney did. We want to show that animation can tell these sorts of stories.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously Disney was like, no, that's going against our popular formula that's worked for us for decades.
Right.
And then once the movie failed, that was all the validation they needed. And again, Katzenberg, for all the good things he supposedly helped doing during the next few years for the Renaissance, he was still like kind of a bitch about stuff like this. Like, he was also the same guy on Who Framed Roger Rabbit that wanted to tone everything down, which would have sucked everything out of that movie. So good thing he didn't have like full control of that one. That not being a completely Disney production. But yeah, as far as this film goes, it's got sort of a standard fantasy type setup, in that you've got, some small, insignificant character leading a fairly dull life, being thrust into a big sort of epic quest type thing that he's not prepared for. Although it's a little weirder. So, like in The Lord of the Rings, you've got Frodo, who has the one ring of power. And now he's got all the forces of Mordor after him, and he has to make his journey. In this, he has a pig that can tell visions by putting its face in the water. So That's creative, I guess, but it's not very cool. It's a pig that shows visions by putting its face in water.
Pig that trips out and shows Fantasia.
Yeah, it's pretty funny too. It is like the pig's eyes go all funny. It's like that pig is on something. It's pretty funny. So yeah. So you talk about people like these, or something. We did another fantasy movie from the '80s on here, Willow, which is once again sort of a guy living a small, insignificant life, etc. But nothing could be like more lower on the ladder than our hero Karen, who is an assistant pig keeper. Because the old man he's with is like the main pig keeper. He doesn't even, and it's not even until the movie starts that he even knows why the pig is important. So what? He's had to live his life as an orphan with this stupid old man bossing him around, telling him that he's supposed to look after this pig. I'd be like, why? It's a pig. And it's not until the movie gets going that he actually finally sees the pig has this power that will be used to get to our big MacGuffin, being the Black Cauldrons. The idea is we have this evil entity, the Horned King, who also went through various changes in design. I actually really like the final design. At one point, they had him as like this big, like Viking-style warrior, which I think is stupid. John Hurt is actually putting effort into the performance. John Hurt is the voice of the king. So, and once again, speaking to the PG rating and the darker tone, he's definitely the most menacing Disney villain since like Maleficent. Because even if you think of all these other Disney villains over the years, as you know, as menacing as they could be in moments, they still had like moments of like, you know, comedic moments or goofy things. But there isn't any here, and you can't do it with this guy. It wouldn't even work, so they don't do it. I mean, he's basically an undead necromancer, and he's pretty scary to look at, especially if you're a kid. And I think that's a really cool thing, and it's too bad, again, that more stuff with him wasn't used fully, because I think he really could have stood out as something special. And getting back to, again, the characters, I did mention, I always forget how to pronounce her name, but the female has like a weird name.
Oh, yeah, it's the names in this movie are stupid.
They're quite stupid. And most of the characters aren't very good, and that's why, again, the name isn't, because, I mean, Elonwy, or Y, or however you say it, Elonwy. And what's the weirdest part about her is she's technically a princess, and guess what? It serves no point to the plot. Like, he gets captured, she comes in, says she's been captured, and she mentions she's a princess, and that's it. She doesn't say anything like, the Horned King conquered my kingdom, he has my parents, or stole their throne. Nothing. She doesn't talk about her kingdom or her family. When the movie ends, she just walks off with them. It's not like she has anywhere to go. They just tack princess on because that's what Disney does. And to their credit, and this is funny, as part of like completely ignoring the existence of this movie, you know how in recent years it's a big deal to have like a big sort of official pantheon of the Disney princesses. You see them in like promotional art and stuff all the time. She is not included. She is not part of this. You will see her in none of that. And I guess that's kind of fitting, but at the same time, I don't know, Disney, you have to acknowledge that she did exist, even if she was bland and forgettable. But that's just another after effect of this movie, and Disney wanting to like distance itself from it and pretend it didn't happen. It's like, no, there wasn't some other princess in the 80s. Nope, we would remember that.
I mean, just the characters are just so unlikable.
I mean, Taran's just a whiner. He's more like the typical Disney princess, because here he is living a life, and all he does is complain about his life and how he wishes he could do stuff. And I love the performance the person gives, because it's so on point for his whininess. He's always like, "Oh, I want to be a warrior." Oh, and there's that one point and I love the line where like when he first sets off into the woods to deliver the pig, and he immediately loses the pig, and he goes, "Oh no." I'm like, good read there. Was the best you could do is just like, oh no. Like he stepped in gum or something.
Oh man, it's so unlikable. He's so whiny.
He's just whiny, and
I mean, he's the hero, right? You're
supposed to be the hero. I mean, he does wind up doing something fairly significant at the end, but again, they cut out so much of it because he's ready to finally like make a sacrifice, which shows, I guess, some growth or whatever. And he does make a couple sacrifices, because one, he has this sword that just does everything for him. He's like, now I can be badass, and he does give up the sword, and then later he's ready to give up his life to try to save. And let's get to it, Gurgi. Oh my God! So Disney is known for always having some sort of weird, annoying comic relief to certain various levels of success. At its highest, you have like, the genie in Aladdin. And then in like most of the middle, you have things like Eddie Murphy as the dragon in Mulan. You know, he's kind of annoying, but he's not terrible. Various sort of sidekicks here and there. You've got Abu also in Aladdin, the monkey that jumps around. Usually you have some sort of animal sidekicks. Then you have the abomination that is Gurgi.
So he's supposed to be like the comic relief, right?
Right, which answers the question, you know, what if Gollum fucked a Yorkshire Terrier? That's what we're looking at and listening to. This is his voice. So I just imagine I talk like this for the rest of this episode.
Not bad.
Except I wouldn't even say I'd have to be like, imagine if Cole, because Gurgi talks in the third person, because those characters are always really fun. And oh my god. And what's really disheartening about Gurgi is if you're watching the movie for the first time, it's not long when after Taran's out in the woods and he loses the pig and then he runs into Gurgi and you're like, oh my god, here we go. But then they get separated and Gurgi's gone. And you're like, maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. But of course, he shows up again later in the film and plays a huge role going forward.
What are you doing here? Oh, I'm just hanging out.
Yeah.
I'm just magically here.
Gurgi wants the smashings and whackings, and he just, so dumb. Like, what a lazy, annoying character. But yeah, so there's another thing you can point to as a failure for this movie, which is this was the best they could do. Like, is the Gurgi character in the novels? I don't know. And if he is he anything like this god-awful thing they have for us, or is he quite different? I'm not sure.
Where on the spectrum is Gurgi? I feel like he needs to have someone like feed him some pudding or something.
Yeah.
He's awful, man. He's awful.
Yeah, and of course he winds up playing a huge role.
As if it wasn't. Yeah, he's in like the entire movie.
Yeah, he usurps Taran as the sort of true hero of the movie, even though he's a bumbling, annoying idiot. At the end, he makes like the ultimate sacrifice to save everybody. But then, of course, because it's Disney, they bring him back to life.
Yeah, he's not dead. He's back.
He's back. Oh, I'm sure there was rejoicing in the theaters. Thank God that Gurgi's back. Oh my God.
Full disclosure, I saw the Care Bears. I did not see this.
Yeah, same here. And I mean, I've always really liked the Care Bear movies. I recognize them for what they are, as pretty bland, annoying shit with like not nearly the production values and stuff. But I still like things about them. And and as an adult, they're sort of like so dumb they're good. Like they're full of like really ridiculous, like bad voice acting, like horrible songs.
I mean, it's the equivalent of taking a Saturday morning cartoon and making a feature length out of it. I mean, but no more effort put into it, you know?
Yeah, and yet it beats this huge production by Disney, the greatest in the world.
Care Bears were huge, though, so
yeah,
at that time.
But I mean, full disclosure here, do I think it's worse than Care Bears? No. It was just a tone type thing, right? Like I think it's kind of misleading that it got beaten by Care Bears at the box office because to me it's a far superior movie than Care Bears. But again, that's because it's just Care Bears. Even if it's an amazing Care Bears movie, it's still just Care Bears. How good could it possibly be, right? So it's just the ultimate humiliation. The Care Bears outperforms this at the box office. But yeah, back in the day, I watched Care Bears, and actually, when we talk about like renting movies and stuff, those were the first things I ever rented were Care Bears movies. And a lot of people remember talking about Care Bears. So Care Bears actually existed in another form before the version we see. Care Bears, I think, came out in 83 or 84 or something like that, and that's the show we know. And then they made 2 movies based on it. But a year before that was actually like a short movie, and that was like it was sort of like, what's the word I'm looking for? It was almost like a pilot, and the animation was slightly different, and some of the voices were different. And I used to rent that one all the time. I don't remember what it's called. It was really weird too. So it actually predates the classic version of Care Bears. It's almost the same, but the art style is a little different. And again, some of the voices are different. Notably, Tenderheart, the leader, he had a very different voice. It's a really weird plot too. I haven't seen it in many years. I'll have to track it down. I don't even remember what it's called, but it's like there's this weird. I don't even remember who the bad guy is, but there's some bad guy, and he has some. It's before this. It's before Darkheart has come in. And he has this machine that, I shit you not, turns like kids into frogs. But not like frogs, but like frog creatures, almost like in Hellboy. like weird,
Cool.
weird Lovecraftian Hyperborea style frog creatures. I'm not kidding. But yeah, and this was done by Canadian animation studio Nelvana, and it proved enough of a hit. And then they reworked it a bit, tweaked it, and then that we got the Care Bears show from that. But,
That was a movie originally.
yeah, like I don't even think it was. It might have only been like 45 minutes. I don't even think it was like a full movie. But yeah, I'll try to see if I can find the title. It's like I think Machines in the title. It's like the Care Bears and the Freeze Machine or something.
That seems like that sounds familiar.
Yeah, the Care Bears battled the Freeze Machine. Yeah, so this came out in '84, and
Ottawa's Atkinson Film Art Studios.
yeah, so they actually fight someone. Oh, so the bad guy in this is called Cold Heart. But as you can see, if you find any stills from it, if you're familiar with the art style of the Care Bear show, this is slightly different.
Yeah.
And again, the voices are a bit different too. Some of them are the same and some of them aren't. But anyway, I used to rent this from Cape Breton Family Video. I used to rent this like all the time. I must have rented it like 7 or 8 times, if not more.
The Freeze
I
Machine?
wouldn't even look at other movies. I would just rent that movie. Again, I was a little kid, so.
No, it's no excuse. No,
well, no excuse to rent it so many times. Like I wouldn't even look at other movies. I'd just be like, I'm just gonna watch that again. You know, so I wasn't.
I saw the Care Bears movie in the theater and I cried at the end.
Okay, so this isn't the original. So there was another one before that from '83 called The Land Without Feelings, which I probably also saw. And it's the same thing, you know, same style and everything like that. I probably saw it, but I don't remember it as well. Cold Heart's also in that. But I'm sure I saw that one, but it was Freeze Machine that I remember well, and it was Freeze Machine that I rented multiple times. Freeze Machine is legitimately disturbing. Like when you see like how the kids get turned, like those frog things, it's messed up. They're not turned into like smiling cartoon frogs hopping around. They're like weird frog human hybrids that can't talk, that have big dead eyes. It's pretty messed up.
I wonder if these are available anywhere. Just out of curiosity.
I'd like to watch it again. What is the running length anyway? Because it's not like a full movie. Yeah, it's only 30 minutes. So yeah. These two things, they were like specials, but they were like precursors to the actual show. And for the show, again, they tweaked it a bit and changed some of it. But it was among the 10 best-selling children videos on the U.S. market in '85. Oh, guess what? If you can get the 2007 reissue of the Care Bears movie, it has this on it. Print featured on the disc is a syndicated edit, not the original broadcast version. Although I have no idea what changes.
Is that a DVD?
Yeah, that's a DVD that came out in 2007. So there's a DVD release of the Care Bears movie from 2007 that includes the Freeze Machine. So that's interesting. And also a big part of my childhood was really the second Care Bears movie, The New Generation. Because in the first one, I mean, there were both things that stood out. In the first one, it was Darkheart's the villain in both of them. Or no, he's only in the second one. In the first one, yeah, it's a weird haunted book, right? So in the first one, there's a kid who works at like a circus, and he's the apprentice to a magician. And the magician's always saying he sucks and stuff. And the kid wants to be a good magician, and he finds a forbidden evil book, and the book takes him over, and that's that. In the second one, we actually do have Darkheart. And what's weird, Darkheart is never in like his classic form, like in the show. In fact, he spends most of the time in the form of like a 13-year-old or so redheaded boy. And it takes place at a summer camp. And his big plan seems to be pose as a counselor at that camp and send sort of passive-aggressive messages that kind of bum people out a little bit. Like, that's what he does in that movie. You have, like, kids at the camp, and there's this thing about, like, some sort of contest, and if you win, you're called Camp Champ. And this girl, who's, like, the main kid, is, like, obsessed with it. She says Camp Champ, like, 100 times in the movie. She's like, I want to be Camp Champ. Oh, I'll never be Camp Champ. Oh, Camp Champ. And, yeah, and Darkheart comes into it. And I'm sure you can find, like, a clip of this. There's a line where Darkheart, who is in disguise again, is this redheaded kid, and the Care Bears just think he's a kid. where I think he might. I don't know if he's in Care a lot at this point or if he's just somewhere in general, but he's with the Care Bears, and he has this plan, and he's to do to get rid of them, and they think he's their friend, of course. They think everybody's their friend, and he suckers them into playing like a game of hide and seek or something like that. And there's a part where like just as they run off to hide, he like turns to the camera and delivers this in the weirdest voice. It's an odd enough line, but the way he delivers, he goes, "Time for a game of disappearing bears." It's so fucked up and weird. I love it.
Like, don't his eyes glow red in that too? Like,
yeah, towards the end when he's being evil, and that used to scare me. And maybe it's part of the reasons why I never get along with redheaded boys. I have a very bad history with redheaded boys growing up. I clashed with them.
But aren't you redheaded?
I am not redheaded. My God, I'm dirty blonde.
Okay.
I mean, here's some dye in the front. But
right. Well, okay.
I used to be a lot more normal blonde, but as I got older, it darkened. So now I'm dirty blonde, also known as ash blonde. I had reddish highlights in my hair. It would have been called a strawberry blonde, but I was never redheaded. My sister's the redhead.
Sister, yeah.
But there's two kinds of redheads. There's like the fiery redhead, which she was not. She was the copper redhead, the more sort of auburn type thing. Yeah, she just turned 40, but it's still the same color as always.
I'm watching a clip of this.
Disappearing bears. Apparently, during this time, while Tim Burton was still working on the movie, it was when he was doing the preliminary sketches that would become the idea for The Nightmare Before Christmas. As I pointed out several times, not because I don't like Tim Burton, I do like Tim Burton, even though it was part of The Nightmare Before Christmas. It's wrong. I think it's wrong to say Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas. He had a lot less to do with it than other people. But anyway. And it's almost like they just slapped his name on it. It's like, well, it's dark and quirky and weird. It must be him. Well, it is, but it's not all him. I can't remember the director of the movie, but he's like the main creative force behind that. But yeah, that was but the Black Cauldron was his last involvement with a Disney animated film before he got booted out for his own little creative project. Again, it shows how times have changed. They were like so horrified by it that they kicked him out. Nowadays, if you buy the Blu-ray or DVD of the Nightmare Before Christmas, it includes that movie on it, Frankenweenie. And then, of course, a few years ago, they made an actual feature-length version of Frankenweenie, computer animated, which I've never seen.
It's good.
Yeah, I like the original. Black Cauldron is the first full-length Disney animated feature film since Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which is, by the way, the first one to have completed scenes cut prior to release. So yeah, entire scenes were cut from this. Not like parts of scenes or things, entire scenes were cut. And that's mostly due to Katzenberg's crazy overreaction to the way that test audience took it.
Again, test audience.
I can understand them to a certain extent being upset about scaring children, and I get that, that was Disney's bread and butter, so I get it to a certain extent, but I don't know. It seems like this could have been a pretty good movie. I'm sure it wouldn't have been a great movie, as we said. Even intact, it has fairly bland characters, and the story is nothing to write home about, but it could have been a lot better than it wound up being. And I still really do like it, just because I think it's still one of the really good looking. It's definitely the best looking Disney film of the '80s. I think it looks better than Little Mermaid. Little Mermaid was the start of the Renaissance, really. Like Little Mermaid looks good. They all look good. Disney animation was always very cutting edge and good for its era. But I really do think it's the best looking animated one from the there. And yeah, the idea of telling a mature dark fantasy was really interesting and new territory for them. The most similar thing they did was The Sword and the Stone in 1963. But that wasn't dark. That was goofy. It had people turning into animals and stuff.
Yeah, that's my favorite Disney film.
Oh, really? I like it a lot. I've always liked it. 1963, I think. Based, obviously, on the Arthur legend, but mostly on the first book of the series, The Once and Future King. one of the most influential fantasy series and novels there is. Really, there's two. There's The Lord of the Rings and there's that Once a Future King. Those are the main two. I'm going to look up John Musker for a second here. Still around. Still at Disney, I think. Yeah, so John Musker he was the lead guy in this until he wound up getting left, and he went over and he went to the Great Mouse Detective. So following up on this movie, Disney had a huge hill to climb to get back, and they had a couple modest successes to follow this up. Next year, they had the Great Mouse Detective in '86, which is a cute little movie, but nothing special. The most notable thing about that movie is that it was the last film I think Vincent Price did, and it was also one of Vincent Price's absolute favorite things. Apparently, he just loved it. He was the villain in that, Radiger or something like that, some sort of evil rat, and he just delighted in that role. Apparently, he loved it. Like, he would have made like 15 sequels if they could have. He really enjoyed it, apparently. And then a movie that I watched just a few days ago, Oliver and Company, came out in '88. Again, a modest success, nothing big. Here's a weird thing. So just the other night, once again, I'm going to get preview of some channels I don't usually get. And some of them show movies, but really weird ones. Or not weird, but ones you wouldn't expect. So the other night, Copland was on. And I know Copland pretty well. But this was the director's cut. Apparently, if you buy the Blu-ray, you can get a director's cut version. And this was being shown, which changes some things around, adds some scenes. I was like, I've never seen the director's cut. I'll watch it. So I watched it. But I can't remember Copland well enough to say what was different. But Copland was directed by a pretty well-known director by the name of James Mangold, who's still going strong, and he's probably best known now because he directed the last two Wolverine movies. He did the Wolverine in 2013 and Logan in 2017. He just did Ford versus Ferrari, and now he's got a whole bunch of stuff in production. He's also the rumored director for the next Indiana Jones movie, so he's a big deal. But the first thing he ever did, he also directed one of my favorite films of the 90s, Girl Interrupted. But anyway, he directed Copland. So anyway, I was looking him up while I was reading about Copland, and I was like, I saw his name recently, didn't I? He wrote Oliver and Company. Isn't that weird?
That is weird.
Stuff like that always happens in my life. Anyway, Oliver Company's a cute little movie. I was totally unprepared for how sad the beginning is, though. I mean, nobody dies and everything turns out fine in the end, but it's just so sad seeing this kitten get abandoned on the streets of New York City. Oliver and Company seem to be part of a wave of late 80s movies, particularly animated movies, but not always, that really were all about celebrating like how unique and annoying at the same time New York is. Like, there was a lot of that in the late 80s. Some of it was just like, New York's the coolest, and some of it is just like New York's a hellhole. Like the Ninja Turtles movies and show were like New York's a hellhole. Ghostbusters 2 is like New York's a hellhole. It's like nobody likes each other, everybody sucks, but people are nice. Remember, it's like you want New Yorkers to be nice to each other. Like that was the thing. It was back when New York really was embracing the idea that the rest of the world thought they were rude and annoying and that they were full of pollution and crime. They just leaned into it. And a really awful animated movie from the early 90s, We're Back, A Dinosaur Story, is full of that. That's one of the worst animated movies I've ever seen in my life. It's god-awful. I hate it with every fiber of my being. I hate everything about it. What a terrible movie that was. I remember years ago, a friend and I rented it and watched it, and I was just appalled, and I remain appalled. I don't think I've ever seen the full thing since then, but I've seen, parts of here and there, and God, I hate that movie. John Goodman's in that. I don't know what studio made that, because finally by the 90s you finally had some other studios cranking out animated movies, most notably DreamWorks. But then Fox even did a few. Like, didn't Fox do the Anastasia movie in '97 and the Prince of Egypt movie? Weren't those Fox?
Oh, Anastasia, wasn't that one of Bluth? One of Bluth's films?
I don't. Let's see.
The Good Dinosaur.
You're right. It is, and that's one of his actually decent ones. Because by the '90s, his movies had turned to pure garbage. But Anastasia is at least decent.
You said it was called The Good Dinosaur?
No. The Good Dinosaur. Wait. So The Good Dinosaur is a Pixar movie from a few years ago. in 2000, an animated movie, a CG, one of the first CG movies that wasn't Pixar, called Dinosaur, came out in 2000. But there was but in the early 90s, not Disney, some other studio did an animated movie called We're Back, a dinosaur story.
Yeah.
And it's an abomination. I hate it so much. So let's see what studio did that.
Oh yeah, I was obsessed with dinosaurs around that time.
So was I. So the movie seemed like a decent enough thing. Oh, it was part of Steven Spielberg's thing. Remember he had like an animation studio in the early 90s when he was doing stuff like Animaniacs and stuff?
Oh yeah.
Amblimation. Which actually tied into some of the Don Bluth stuff. It did like 5 Goes West and stuff. But yeah, We're Back, a dinosaur story. But anyway, one of the kids in that, like, it's like the girl. It's so stereotypical. It's so dumb. Like, it's about a boy and a girl, and the girl is like really posh. She's from like a rich family, and she's all snooty and stuff. And then she meets a boy who's like this street smart know-it-all. Hey, it's New York type shit. Like, it gets used over and over again, which is also in Oliver and Company, because that's the first thing Oliver meets is the dog played by Billy Joel. And that's his thing. Oh, I'm a cool hip dog, and I know the streets and blah, blah, blah. Like, oh, that character's done to death, especially in children's movies. Jay Leno is in We're Back, a Dinosaur Story. What a weird fucking time to be alive. 1993, when Jay Leno is doing the voice of a dinosaur in a movie. And Larry King's in that movie as himself. What's that?
So I wish I could do a Jay Leno impression. I can't go that. I can't go that high pitched.
Let me try. I can get into character. He's like, "Do you see this in the news? You heard about this? You heard about this?" That's usually how he leads off most of his bits. It's like something that happened in the news. You see this? You heard about this? So they're saying now that blah, blah, blah. I lost it, if I ever had it to begin with. But anyway, We're Back, a Dinosaur Story is an awful animated film. That makes Don Bluth's movies of the time look a lot better by comparison. But you're right. I'd forgotten that Anastasia is actually a Don Bluth production. So that's actually decent. Like, it's not great or anything, but it's decent. Whereas, like, let's look at his filmography here. I mean, let's go to the ones that, like, he was like the main director or whatever. It's like Secret of Min, I think Min is a masterpiece. I think it's one of the best there is. The American Tail, I don't like it the same way a lot of people do, but I get what's good about it. The Land Before Time, again, it's for pretty young kids, but in that context, it's good. Now things start to slide. All Dogs Go to Heaven is okay. It's not bad. It's not good. Rockadoodle is god-awful. Thumbelina is god-awful. A Troll in Central Park is god-awful. The Pebble and the Penguin is god-awful. Like, what a run that is. Then he did Anastasia. I forgot he came back to do Titan A.E., which is, again, sort of decent. So, yeah, Don Bluth hasn't actually directed a movie in 20 years. But, I mean, that stretch, Rockadoodle, Thumbelina, Troll in Central Park, The Pebble and the Penguin, those are just all horrible movies.
I think some of those did okay, though. I remember seeing the commercials on TV.
Oh, probably.
Like, wasn't Rockadoodle about the rooster that, like, struts his chest out all the time and stuff?
Yeah, it's like a rooster that thinks he's basically Elvis.
Yeah.
It's annoying as hell. I don't know. It's got Glenn Campbell in it.
Oh, it's going to be good.
Troll, like, the other thing was, like, even as early as his first movie, Secret of NIMH, like, it's true, like, Secret of NIMH, as great as it is, it does have, like, some problems, and their problems are called Dom DeLuise. And Dom DeLuise is in all his movies, playing the same dumb character with the same dumb voice, doing it and bumbling around. It's really annoying. It's especially it's less annoying later because the movies fall in quality, so it doesn't really matter. But in The Secret of NIMH, it's you just have this beautiful, dark, amazing, arresting story, and then you have Don Bluth going through it. And you just want to hurl. Man, I don't dislike Dom DeLuise, but Don Bluth's obsession with him and sticking him into all his movies to play the same character, whether he's a crow or a dog or a cat or whatever the fuck he is, it's always the same character. He's just some bumbling idiot that says a bunch of dumb stuff.
Just doing his voice. I mean, not trying to do a voice, doing his own voice.
And I mean, I get him doing his own voice for some roles because he's one of those guys with a very distinctive voice that would lend itself to animation. But you're right, switch it up sometimes, dude.
Does he throw confetti in the air?
He might as well. I don't know. He just bumbles around. Is super annoying.
Or wait, no, that's Rip Taylor, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I guess so.
Oh, they're all the same person to me.
It's kind of sad that like speaking of last roles, not just Vincent Price, but the last role Jimmy Stewart ever had was in American Five Goes West, where he plays like a character called like Wyatt Burp or something. It's like what a dignified end to. Like,
that's not it. That's too funny.
He's this old dog that can barely see, but he's like a gunslinger or something that Five looks up to.
Cock Holiday.
That's a good one. I could get behind.
Because he's a rooster.
Yeah. You know, I am interested. You know, I've never tracked down the Chronicles of Peri Jane. I wonder if they're any good. Obviously, this movie had to make quite a few differences. One was there were being sort of, you know, epic fantasy novels. They had a lot more characters. This really cut down the characters and cut things down. So there's quite a few characters that are from that are not in the movie. So yeah, that's something maybe I'll try to track down the first book. The Book of Three, I think that's the first one. The Black Cauldron is actually, I think, the second book. So it's the Book of Three and the Black Cauldron. Anyway, basically their plots were sort of combined for this movie, but obviously all sorts of stuff was cut out of it. In the film, Henwin is a piglet. In the book, she's a full-grown white sow. Well, I guess they figured it's cuter if it's a piglet. I think it would be funnier if it was like this big, huge pig he had to like look after and chase after instead of a cute little piglet. But another lost opportunity.
That pig looked familiar too. It looked like the pig from Charlotte's Web.
Yeah.
Wilbur.
Yeah.
I think it's because it had eyelashes, which I don't think pigs really do. But
yeah, they figured out that was the formula to make them cute.
Very pronounced Tyler, which I don't know which came first.
Charlotte's Web came first. I'm pretty sure that was 70s.
Oh, really?
That's a pretty solid animated film too.
Yeah, it is.
The Charlotte's Web one. I haven't seen it in a long time, but I think it still holds up pretty well.
Did you ever see the live action?
It's not that bad. It has a lot of good moments. I mean, my main problem it's predictable. I hate Julia Roberts as the spider.
I figured.
And I figure like that's a role like she just like lapped up so much because it's a role with so much like honor and integrity and everything, and she gives these speeches like I don't know. Julia Roberts I've never liked as an actress, and as a person she's almost so insufferable. She's so full of herself. So I think like that. I think a role like that just fed into her giant ego. And speaking of giant egos, Oprah's in that film, but at least she's playing a fairly small role. Oprah's like one of the geese or something in that.
Yeah, there's a few people in that do voice work in there.
Oh yeah, Robert Redford's in there. There's quite a few big names. Is Dakota Fanning the little girl?
Yeah.
If there was a little girl in a movie in the early 2000s, it was Dakota Fanning.
And then Abigail Breslin took over.
Yeah, she's the absolute perfect. What's the successor?
And they
little blonde girls with big eyes, you know.
Yeah. And they both look weird as adults. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Yeah, what's weird is like Dakota's other sister she's very pretty now. Dakota's not pretty, but sure. She probably didn't age the way you think she was going to age. I know what you mean. Like when you saw her as a kid, you kind of thought, you kind of figured like what she might age into.
I think we've had a discussion about guys that say like, "Oh man, she's going to be hot one day." Like that's not something that you say, right? Because you know. But,
plus, most of those guys that say that, they already think they're hot now.
Exactly.
Let's be honest.
That's the key word. I mean, it's not something I ever thought, but I didn't think they would be like unattractive. I'm just kind of surprised at the end product.
I mean, it depends upon how young, but I mean, let's be completely honest. You're not like the average heterosexual male is attracted to girls who are like 15 to 17 or whatever. Like that's not like a weird aberration. You know, like watch the video for what's it called, Candy or whatever, by that goddess Mandy Moore. She's 15 in that. Don't tell me they're not marketing it in a way that she's like, you know, like any adult or anything like that. I'm not blaming
I watched
Mandy
it when
Moore.
I was like 17, you know, and I was okay with it, but you know, I think anything older than that is weird.
Yeah, it's weird, but it's also it's like common sense too. It's like, well, what weren't they gonna do with her? Look at her, you know.
But when you're 13, you're attracted to 13-year-olds, and older. But
But that's a weird thing, right? Even when you're a kid, you're attracted to adults, and that's
Yeah.
considered normal.
But also, your peers as well.
Yeah.
But I mean, who knew that Jerry O'Connell was going to grow up to be the hunk he is? And,
I know.
Stand by Me,
Yeah. Well, that's the rule, right? Like, there's quite a few child actors that you understand why they were child actors because they were, aesthetically pleasing looking kids, and most of them did grow up to be fairly attractive adults. But as every once in a while, like you said, you have that blip, and then but the opposite is true much more often. You'll find people that are like considered very attractive now, and you'll see like their high school yearbook picture, and you're like, like a lot of them are more late bloomers for whatever reason. Not all. It's funny. I was on this tack not too long ago. I watched Heavyweights also on Disney Plus because in Heavyweights there's a part where to embarrass them, Ben Stiller's character arranges a dance with the girls' camp, and of course all the fat guys are on one side of the room, the girls on the other side of the room. Nobody's dancing, and then they're looking at the girls, and the most beautiful girl of all of them walks over. She's credited as Angelic Girl in the credits. She would have been 15 at the time. Walks over, and they're like, but all she does is ask them for like. Where the bathroom is. I looked her up, and like within 5 years, she was in Playboy.
Yeah, if I remember you telling me that.
Yeah, she did a lot more modeling than actressing. And what's funny is I guess she was such a prominent member of Playboy that in 2007, when they made that movie, The House Bunny, she's in that as herself. So I guess if you were like a fan of Playboy, you'd be like, hey, there she is. Like,
that's March of 1995.
I mean, there's guys with that kind of like that's how they remember it, right? I was in a weird place. Like I was somewhat Playboy generation, but I didn't need it, and the internet was emerging, right? So I don't have any of those like memories, like March '95, stuff like that. And the only Playboy I had regular access to was from 1977.
You were Playmate of the Month, 1996. I feel like if you do know that, that's kind of weird.
I mean, it's a lot worse nowadays. Like there's porn conventions, right? Like.
That's fucking weird.
I mean, I've fully admitted many times to watching porn, and sure, I use it for what it's used for. But I couldn't imagine, even if it was free, like going to a porn convention so I could meet some woman saying, "Here, can you sign this? I really enjoyed your gangbang." I thought that was great. You took it like a champ.
You got DP of the year.
And I mean, 90%, probably even more than 9% of the guys that go to that are like the guys that have had like no experience with women whatsoever.
I know.
I can, I admit, I watch porn, but at least I can say I've had a sex life at times in my life. But these are some of the guys where this is it, right? So I mean, it must be, I don't know.
That's the two sides of the coin, right? You've got those guys, like the complete like losers that is their life, is like porn stars.
Yeah.
And then you've got the other guys like the Dan Bilzerians or whatever his name is, like these like super like rich guys that just live in that like lifestyle, like, and they're totally cool with it. And they're both weird, that like you're just okay with that, like I can't even think of somebody, these fucking like sleazy dudes wear probably backwards hats or some shit. I don't know. But these guys are just that's their life,
You mean like going to those things or being in porn?
That environment, like being around porn stars, and they're probably like involved in the industry somehow. But
I mean, Kid Rock was, right? Like he like hung out in that atmosphere. And I mean, I get it. He had the perks. He's like, I'm Kid Rock, so he obviously got to fuck some of them and stuff. But I mean,
guys like Charlie Sheen or something, maybe like a bootleg Charlie Sheen would be there. Not quite as successful as him, but like fucking. The guy from Married with Children, the
Al Bundy.
No, the kid.
No, I don't know the show well enough.
But like guys like that, or like Edward Furlong or something, like that seems like something he would be into.
I guess so. But I mean, yeah, I watch porn. I consider myself a sexual person, but I think I would just feel awkward and weird at like a convention like that. I'd be like, okay, yeah, I've seen videos of her doing all sorts of shit, but why would I want to meet her?
She got best new blowjob of the year.
Yeah. That was a great. You were up for double penetration. You didn't quite get it, but it's an honor just to be nominated.
Take this cocaine.
Yes, this is the brilliance of our show. In a discussion of the Black Cauldron, we can still talk about porn conventions.
That bummed me out more than the movie itself.
Yeah. Like I said, the movie bums me out more because I think that there could have been a good movie. Not a great movie, but it could have been a lot better than it was. And the circumstances surrounding it and stuff just like doomed it. And now we're left with like this weird odd anomaly. But I still enjoy it. I still like it. It's like not like I'm going to throw it on again, but it really does have a great, rich visual style, which I enjoy. And I appreciate them trying to go a bit darker, and they got cut off at the knees in their attempt because they actually did go darker than what we actually get to see as the finished product, which is really too bad. Would have liked to have seen it fully realized as they, planned it before they let Katzenberg run wild on it. But yeah, I mean, as far as like Katzenberg and those people that were on his side, they were like, this is, its failure was proof that they were right. But I don't think so. I think it failed for the reasons we talked about, like, because of cutting out some of that stuff and not letting it go where it was. And also the characters are bland and uninteresting, and you don't even let them do anything. They do almost nothing in this movie. Like, what do they do? Okay, so he's taking care of a pig. He takes the pig and immediately loses it. Then he gets captured. Then he manages to, through dumb luck, to get the pig away from the Horned King, but he remains captured. The princess, who was also captured, manages to free him. Together, they free the bard. They all get out, and they run into fairies, and the fairies give them the pig. Now they need to find the Black Cauldron. They very easily find the witches. They give up the sword, and the witches give them the Black Cauldron. Okay, now we have the MacGuffin. We have the thing. Oh, they're immediately captured by the bad guys that want the Black Cauldron, and now the bad guys are going to use the Black Cauldron. How are we going to stop it? Oh, the Black Cauldron's been opened or used. Now the armies of the undead are marching. They're going to ravage the world. Oh, our big hero, Gurgi, sacrifices himself, jumps into the cauldron, interrupting the spell. So now the armies of the undead have stopped. The Horned King comes back to see what's going on, runs into our hero, Terran, and all that happens is he holds onto a wall a little bit better than the Horned King does. The Horned King gets sucked into it, and that ends everything. It's like, wow. Like, at least in the original version, he was a bit more proactive. He fights some soldiers. He has a protracted battle with the Horned King. All that gets cut out. I mean, geez, you're just left with this empty shell of a movie with nothing interesting going on in it. And again, you've got characters that serve almost no purpose. And speaking of like those moments that happen, even like in Lord of the Rings or like that, so I wish there was more stuff with the fairies. That was like 5 minutes long, and you can tell like by some of them that are voiced by little kids. Those are like the producers' kids or something, just thrown in there like that. Especially that little girl with the lisp. Oh my god! Like they're like, fairies are cute, so they'll sound like toddlers. Like, who thinks that way? I realize it's all academic, it's all fiction, it's all made up. There's no such thing as fairies. But if we're going to get into it, do you really think if there were fairies, they would sound like goddamn toddlers? Stuff like that bugs the shit out of me. But they were like, somebody's kid has to read her lines, and terrible. But yeah, I kind of like the fairy stuff. And isn't it really weird, speaking of a character that serves no purpose? So one of the fairies, the weird gruff yellow one, gets sent along with them, and he doesn't do anything. And he gets the last line of the movie, and it's useless. Like at the very end, they're all walking off in their victory walk. He's not with them. He's back with Terran's original master, the Pig Keeper, and he says something like, "Great job, heroes, onward," or something like that. And then the yellow fairy guy goes, "Yup," or something, and then the credits roll. Like, what? Like, talk about hitting all the wrong notes. Like that'd be like having like the last line of Lord of the Rings being delivered by, I don't know, that innkeeper that they ran into it for 5 seconds in the first one. So dumb. He was voiced, by the way, the Yellow Fairy was voiced by the same guy that gave us the delightful Gurgi voice. What a talent. But Roger Ebert actually gave this a positive review, and the visuals were splendid, and they were major disappointed. The charm, characterization, and sheer good humor found in previous Disney efforts are sadly absent. I can definitely agree with that. This movie does not have any charm or anything really memorable about it beyond visual style.
I guess Ebert had to finish out his contract with Disney
Yeah.
and giving it a positive review.
Yeah, I don't have details on it there.
I mean, if it was a Disney movie, he wasn't going to give it a bad review.
I suppose.
If it was a slasher movie, it was immediately going to get hacked to pieces.
Lacking the humor and pathos and the fantasy, which have been so strong in Lloyd Alexander's work. So obviously somebody's saying, like, the books are a lot better. The story had been a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It was heartbreaking to see such a wonderful material wasted. And yeah, that's sort of how I feel. Because Disney had been adapting, they would do their own thing in something like the Aristocats every once in a while. But mostly they adapted fairy tales and such. And here they were adapting something quite different, like a mature, modern work. These books are probably obviously from the 60s, I guess, I think. I don't know that for 100%, but something like that. Anyway, fairly modern and, a chance of something more mature and dark. And yeah, they just whiff on it completely. Although, as we said several times, it seems like if it hadn't been cut so much of a cut, it would have been at least a little bit better. Lloyd Alexander, here's the author, had a more positive yet complex reaction to the film. First, I had to say there's no resemblance between the movie and the book. Having said that, the movie in itself, purely as a movie, I found to be very enjoyable. I had fun watching it. What I hope is that anyone who sees the movie would certainly enjoy it, but I also hope they'd actually read the book. The book is quite different. It's a very powerful, very moving story, and I think people would find a lot of depth in the book. So that's a very diplomatic thing to say, really. I think he's being nicer than he really wants to be. But he's just saying, yeah, if you were disappointed in the movie, my books will hold up. I don't know. But it represented Disney's attempt to reach out to teenage fans or of fantasy novels. So they were trying to reach a new audience, which I respect. And yet when a bunch of like little kids were out, Katzenberg's like, we've alienated our core audience, make a million cuts. It's too bad because maybe there's an alternate timeline somewhere where this movie doesn't have all the cuts and is at least somewhat successful. And maybe it emboldens Disney to do similar projects in the future. And I know what you're going to say. Well, how could it be better? Because in a few years later, they have the Renaissance and they have a string of hits. And I'm not saying those movies aren't good because they are. But I don't know. It's something interesting to think about. So this, as we said, this sort of represents the absolute low point that had started somewhere in the 70s. And by the mid-80s, Disney had just fallen off completely to the point where this almost sunk their animation department entirely. Which is almost unfathomable to think about because to this day, even if they've changed up the animation studio, their bread and butter is the full-length, feature animated film. And yet this movie almost killed that. So that's one of the main reasons I really wanted to talk about it because the aftermath is because the lead up is interesting, but the aftermath is also very interesting because who would have thought at the time that within a few short years, Disney would completely turn things around and then have a string of dominant hits that would last throughout almost the whole next decade.
So after this, was it Little Mermaid first?
No. So after this, they had just had a couple more modest successes. After this, they had The Great Mouse Detective in 86, Oliver and Company in 88, and then Little Mermaid. And there's also a good documentary that touches on some of this. It's on Disney Plus. It's called Waking Sleeping Beauty. That talks about this era. It's pretty interesting what they say about The Little Mermaid too, because apparently the movie was like seen as like a huge risk. Like nobody thought it was going to do anything. They're all like, "Oh, what are we doing? We're talking about a fish princess here. Like this isn't going to work." And so, and a few years later, something that also was similar was that The Lion King and Pocahontas went into production around the same time. And Will Eisner was super high on Pocahontas because he's just like, oh man, like this has hit written all over it. It's basically like West Side Story, but with like an adventure in the New World twist. And then his thought was like Lion King. I don't know. That looks like a really weird thing. And apparently, like all the people that were working on Lion King, most of them wanted to work on Pocahontas, but they didn't make the cut. So, and yet Lion King turned out to be a huge phenomenon. And yeah. Pocahontas was decent, but seen as maybe even the beginning of the end of that dominant streak. I used to really dislike Pocahontas. I've revisited it. It has more things going for it, but at the time I really didn't like it.
Listen to the wolf cry at the blue corn moon.
Is that one of the lines?
Hmm.
Yeah. I remember it had a pretty good, like his main song, "The Colors of the Wind," is a good song, but there's a lot I forget. Isn't it weird? Like that movie has like Mel Gibson in a role where he's like learning to be racially sensitive.
I was thinking that was Mel Gibson's voice.
Yeah.
He's like, at least he's not Jewish.
I'm sure that's what he thought. Oh my god.
Because he's one of the Holocaust deniers, right? Or was?
I don't know if he's a straight up denier or what, but like he's part of that whole like sphere, like where he's like under the influence and stuff, said some devastating things about Jewish people.
I mean, I get conspiracy theories, right? But I mean, is it just myth? Like, what makes that happen? I mean,
I don't even understand the point of denying the Holocaust. Like, even if you're like a white supremacist, like super, like, aren't you happy it happened and super proud of your boys? Like, why would you deny it?
yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think you necessarily have to be a racist or an anti-Semite to be a Holocaust denier, but.
Well, then what's the point though? Why would you deny all this fact right in your face? What would be your motivation?
So it's racially motivated. Like, it's to say it didn't happen is demeaning.
That's the only kind I've ever heard. I've never heard of somebody who was a Holocaust denier that didn't have the angle that, like, you know, they really hated Jews and thought they were a bunch of sneaky liars.
I just can't think of a reason either way that it would be a negative.
That's always the reason I've heard. Holocaust deniers are always people that really dislike Jews and say really mean and racist things against them. They say stuff, you know, like either it didn't happen at all or it happened, but it's been grossly exaggerated and it's been orchestrated by the Jews to create sympathy so they could, you know, these are these people that think, you know, the Jews control everything and stuff, right?
So they were just hanging out, like, you know, taking naps and stuff while they were not in concentration camps?
I don't know. I haven't looked too thoroughly into exactly what they think the other explanation is. But yeah, I've never heard of the Holocaust denier that didn't have that angle. Because what would be the point?
It's the water, man. Chemtrails. They just say things.
So I don't know if Mel Gibson has publicly done any of that, but he's at least tied into that kind of stuff. And he's definitely publicly said anti-Semitic things. We all know that.
Not smart.
No.
Smart.
But, yeah. 95, he was riding high. He just come off Braveheart.
Tell you what, it lost him a guest role in The Hangover 2.
I thought they'd show anybody in those movies. They like Mike Tyson enough.
Nope, Zach Galifianakis.
We like Mike Tyson. We like Mike Tyson, but we draw the line at Mel Gibson.
He was originally cast as a tattoo artist, and Zach Galifianakis would not have him.
Yeah, I heard that. I mean, I guess that's fine. I mean, sometimes it's annoying when stars use their pull to get their way, but in that, I kind of get it.
I don't even know if it would have played the way they wanted it to anyway.
I don't like those movies anyway.
No.
But yeah, so following this movie, they had The Great Mouse Detective, which didn't set the world on fire or anything, but it kind of helped right the ship a little bit. The good thing they changed the title, because the original working title was something like the something of Baker Street, like the Basil of Baker Street or something like that. Which, I mean, yeah, if you're into Sherlock Holmes, you're going to get it. But if you're making an animated Disney movie about mice, your audience is not going to get that reference. So it's a good thing they actually changed it. I'm probably going to watch that pretty soon since I've got it. But yeah, it was a modest success. I don't think it did great. It has some good moments, but I think it helped right the ship a little bit and get them on their feet. And then Oliver and Company was sort of similar. It wasn't a big deal. People didn't flock to see it. It didn't get amazing critical response. By the way, Dom DeLuise in that. I think Disney did that on purpose to like show Don Bluth that they could use Dom DeLuise too. And of course, once again, he's the worst part of that movie. At least he's actually playing it. And what's in a weird twist in a movie about like talking cats and dogs, Dom DeLuise plays a human. Didn't see that coming. But it's a neat little idea because, you know, it's a little play on Oliver Twist. I like things like that, but you know, set in New York with animals, why not? But yeah, it was Little Mermaid that really started the Renaissance, because it was just a massive hit, and it was sort of a return to form in a way, because now once again they were back to like having prominent musical numbers. There are musical numbers in those other two movies, but none of them are like big or lavish ones. Once again, what a weird time. It's 1988. Billy Joel is not just providing the music, but he's also one of the lead characters' voices. Bette Midler is one of the lead character voices. I mean, you want to talk about an oddity for a Disney movie. Do you know whose music opens the movie? Huey Lewis and the News. But I guess it works because they're going for a real New York vibe, right? So it works.
Billy Joel.
I like Billy Joel, okay. I mean, not really his 80s output as much, but his 70s output is solid. There's a really weird joke about that in the movie Step Brothers. Because in Step Brothers, the end scene is at like this big event, and they have a Billy Joel cover band, but they only play 80s Billy Joel. Remember that? Like people are going, play Piano Man! Like, I got as we said before, we are strictly 80s Billy Joel. I love that. I just like that. It's an interesting line in the sand to draw. We're a Billy Joel cover band, but only his 80s stuff.
That's the Catalina wine mixer.
Oh, whatever it was. Where they wind up playing the that weird Italian song that everybody listened to for a few years. But as we said, as Western animation went, Disney was the trendsetter. So when we're in what was known as the Dark Age, what's kind of interesting is Disney kind of resisted it for a few years, because Disney wasn't really in a dark age in the 60s. They were still going strong, 101 Dalmatians and The Jungle Book, and what was the other one? I said The Sword and the Stone, all pretty good ones. But the rest of the world, since they didn't have the clout Disney had, it was all about limited animation. This is why you'll see like a weird drop in quality. This is why like animation from the 40s actually holds up better than a lot of animation from the 60s, because the same care wasn't going into it. I think I made this comparison before, but if you want to make a direct comparison, a great thing to look at is Superman cartoons. In the 40s, those Fleischer, or is it Fleischman or Fleischer? But anyway, they made those Superman cartoons, and they look so good. They're so full of life and the movement and everything. Then you watch the Super Friends in the 60s, and it's stilted garbage. So it really shows how that had gone. But anyway, so by the 70s, Disney was starting to succumb to it. In the 80s, it's a full-on dark age for Disney and the rest of animation. And as Disney went, everything came out. So when Disney came out of it with a few, there were also some TV projects we talked about too. Gummy Bears might have been the start of it, and also, which is a really weird show, and also DuckTales. And it finally gave other studios the idea that, hey, maybe you could actually put some effort into animated shows, even if they are for kids. And that's how things started to turn around going into the 90s, and we got some good high-quality stuff. But yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff I loved from the 80s as a kid, they were glorified commercials. He-Man and Gem and She-Ra and Transformers and G.I. Joe, and they had their moments. They did have writers who were trying sometimes, but there was only so much they could do, and it was all full of things like animation errors and, the wrong character speaking. You would see that in Ninja Turtles and stuff too. Raph would speak with Donatello's voice. Happened tons of times in Transformers. And of course, limited animation and backgrounds being used over again, and even entire sequences being used over and over again. And again, not everybody's Disney, so they can't afford it, but once Disney got its own renaissance going, the rest of the West followed, and then this coincided with finally the West taking note of the animation that had never slowed down, Japanese animation, and that's why the 90s was sort of the rich mosaic that it was, because finally, like, quality that had been going on overseas all the time was finally getting recognized over here, and it finally influenced Western animation. You were seeing Western animation that was trying to do stuff like the anime, which is pretty cool.
What was the first one that started doing that?
That's a good question. I mean, I know Aeon Flux is a good example.
Oh, yeah.
It has a very anime-esque feel. But there was definitely other stuff before that. You even saw it in comics a little bit. my favorite X-Men crossover is that massive Age of Apocalypse event with the whole thing, and its art style is very manga-esque, at least from that era, and it really shows. So it happened on multiple levels. Interesting. I mean, the Black Cauldron was like such a debacle that it took over 4 years of production, and it was one of the longer droughts for Disney. Between 81 and 85, they didn't have any feature-length films. They had The Fox and the Hound, and then they had several years blank before they did the Black Cauldron, which I think remains an anomaly for Disney. I don't think they've had gaps that long since, unless we're going back to the early 2000s, which was a weird transition where Disney's just like, it seems a lot more profitable just to do everything CGI. And they made some of what are considered the worst in the animated canon. And what I think is unfair that the Black Cauldron is considered part of this, because it's a lot better than Home on the Range, which was one of Disney's last hand-drawn animated films. It came out in 2004, which I saw just to see, and it sucks. Like, it doesn't even feel like Disney. I mean, it's got such a weird cast, too. Listen to this. Roseanne Barr, okay. Jennifer Tilly, Randy Quaid, Steve Buscemi. Oh, now let's move up the ladder a little bit. Cuba Gooding Jr., okay. And Judi Dench. Like, what? Who threw that blender together? It's just messed up. Anyway, I don't think Black Cauldron is nearly as bad as that. I think Black Cauldron still has some good things going for it, and at least it looks quality, even if it doesn't play quality.
Mm-hmm. I think voice acting is a big problem with this film too.
Yeah, as I said, it seems like so many of like the reads, they just like, okay, go ahead. Like, it seems like nobody ever did another take. They were like, that's good enough. As I said, my favorite part that like Taron says when he loses the pig, oh no, like great emotion there, Taron. That's great. It really makes your stupid whiny character even more likable. And Gurgi, it seems like they thought up Gurgi's voice and character in about 3 seconds. Oh, let's go with that. You sound like you're gurgling. We'll call him Gurgi.
They had that guy, and they're like, "Can you do a crazy voice?"
Yeah,
he probably did something like that.
It's like, he's going to be great. We're going to sell so many toys of him. He's going to be a phenomenon unto himself.
You know that happened.
Yeah.
The same way they did with the black hole.
You're right. Black hole. Oh man, the black hole was. I mean, at least by the time you got to Sword in the Stone, by the time you got to this movie, the confidence had wavered. There was a lot of doubt. But with the black hole, no. They thought, yeah, this is going to be a.
They already had like merch ready to go. Like they had the figures.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they put some out, but I don't. When the movie failed so bad, I think they scrapped all that.
Yeah.
Full, in the Star Wars model, full lineup of action figures and toys.
See, it's interesting to compare them, especially about like expectations and how big failures they were. Because I definitely consider Black Hole a worse movie, and I also consider Black Hole a bigger failure. But this movie's sort of viewed as a bigger failure because of the context, because of where the animation department was at the time. And as we said, they were already kind of slipping. And then this movie came out, gets killed at the box office, and it was almost put the nail in the coffin for the animation department in general, which is, again, crazy to think about nowadays. How could that happen? But at the time, it was a very real possibility.
So if you had to pick one of the two to watch for the rest of your life.
Black Cauldron, because at least it's nice to look at. The other one's not even nice to look at. It's dull and ugly.
Yeah, but there's lasers shooting everywhere.
Mm-hmm. But like not very much action to go along with it. It's a lot of like standing and pointing.
There's garbage cans with eyes on them.
I know, voiced by Slim Pickens. And of course, there's the great heartthrob of the era. What's his name? He has such a weird name. Not Leonard Nimoy, of course. He's older. He's older than Leonard Nimoy. Ernest Borgnine. Oh man, Disney knew what they were doing. Ernest Borgnine. Now there's an exciting actor. But yeah, so we of course talked about a lot about, and I always make callbacks to it. We did a whole series on the New Hollywood era and how New Hollywood sort of kickstarted the movie in general and changed the direction. That's really what the Renaissance did for animation in the West, because you finally saw the medium get a real bump up in technical quality and again just effort, which really helped. It hadn't been seen since probably the Golden Age, and bridging the gap between the two, you had, as I said, also part of this was '88, not strictly a Disney movie, but with a lot of Disney products was Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which just kicked, not just in the industry but in general, it reignited an interest in the Golden Age of animation in general. People were like, "Oh yeah, that stuff was really good." Like there was a lot of that. But yeah, so the '80s, I mean, they were strangled by what we call the animation age ghetto, pathetic budgets, limited animation, and all the shows at the time, as we said, were basically merchandise driven, and it really showed to the point that like parents actually did complain to TV stations about this, about how their children were basically watching glorified commercials, and also the fact that the '80s, and that this has less to do with animation, it's just more about the '80s in general, but it shows that like, the '80s weren't as backwards as the way I always think of them as. In the '80s, everybody was racist and homophobic and sexist. Like, not everybody, because actually quite a few people were disturbed by the huge divide in the shows that you watch, and that there were shows for boys and there were shows for girls. The boys had He-Man and Transformers and G.I. Joe, and the girls had My Little Pony and Strawberry Shortcake and Rainbow Bright and stuff like.
She-Ra.
Yeah. What's funny is I watched more She-Ra than He-Man. And you can understand why, because She-Ra was sort of bridging the gap, because it was a female main character, was very kind of like a boy show, like an action show. But there were parents that were concerned about this, because they were like, you shouldn't just be drawing a line down the middle and saying, here's boy shows and here's girl shows. Boys are blue, girls are pink. And that's kind of forward thinking. That's more like what we think about now. But it's true. People in the '80s were also, some of them, disturbed by this. They're saying, you shouldn't just be so black and white or whatever with kids. You should let them, you should make stuff that appeals to both, and that's something that the animation Renaissance did too. Because you watch a show like DuckTales, you watch a show like Gummy Bears. Who's that for? Well, it's for everybody. There's no boy-girl division there. So that's kind of a thing that doesn't get talked about as much, but I do think is part of it. Plus, it was also a weird era where a lot of like live action properties got animated shows made off of them, and it didn't usually work out too well. I mean, the real Ghostbusters, I guess, was the top of the heap, but after that they made some really fucked up things. Like there was a show called The Fonz and the Happy Days Gang, which took place in space.
Wow, I didn't know that.
They made it, and of course what's funny is my memories of Alf are the animated show more so than the sitcom. In fact, I probably used to think that the animated show came first, but it didn't. Because that's what I remember watching. I remember watching the animated Alf a lot more than the live action sitcom. But yeah, the Black Cauldron, as I said, like I don't think it's as bad as a movie as the Black Hole, and I don't really think it's as bad a failure. But on paper, it looks like a bigger failure, because this was supposed to be the stunning debut of this whole new generation of animators. And it was supposed to, and not just that, but it was also supposed to elevate Disney the way they would later on by trying something new and going in a new direction by being more dark or complex. And then, of course, Katzenberg and everybody did what they did and cut it off. And what happened. Eisner and Katzenberg both had their reason to do this. The directors didn't have any say in the cuts they made. Mm-hmm. And that's how, to this day, that's actually still how Disney works, technically. They can still do that. They haven't. I guess they haven't had reason to, but they still could. Disney is still structured in that way that if Eisner or whoever the hell is there now wanted to, significantly censor or cut things in like a Pixar movie or whatever like that he could do that. What's funny is the same year the Gummy Bears came out, Disney did debut another original series at the same time. And I'm sure you probably forgot about it because I did too. And that's the Wuzzles.
Oh, no.
Oh, you do remember the Wuzzles. Well, anyway, the Wuzzles did not do that well, whereas Gummy Bears really took off and became a major hit and laid the groundwork for the Disney shows that would eventually emerge into the whole Disney afternoon landscape, which we've talked about before on this show with all those things.
The Wuzzles were like the combination animals, right? It was like a tiger and a bee or something like that. Or like
That's right. That's very good. I did not expect you to remember that. That's good. Yeah.
A bee and like a monkey and a panda bear or something.
Yeah, I had at least one of them. They were pretty imaginative toys, I guess I got to say.
Yeah. I didn't know it wasn't successful, actually.
No, I think it only lasted like a season.
I liked it a lot.
But yeah, as part of that whole thing is again, although I said 88, which was Who Framed Roger Rabbit, even before Who Framed Roger Rabbit, there was sort of a new appreciation for the golden age, old timey things. Because the one thing we've never talked about in our longer discussions about Ralph Bakshi is that he did do an animated cartoon series in the 80s. He did The New Adventures of Mighty Mouse, which I don't know how successful it was at the time, but remains kind of a benchmark because it was considered such a high quality show because it was such a great throwback to those old sort of slapstick golden age style stuff. Not to mention being Bakshi, it had various like in jokes and stuff like getting crap past the radar, fairly adult oriented stuff snuck in, including a very memorable one about like sniffing flowers that was basically cocaine metaphor, which I think actually sunk it. I think he stepped over the line once too many for that. Yeah, Mighty Mouse, The New Adventures. But it helped bring back sort of the old school, sort of like cartoony cartoons.
So Mighty Mouse was a drug addict?
At least for one episode.
That's like his red kryptonite.
Yeah. But unfortunately, it never really seemed to air anywhere that I watched. But it was actually an influence on Bruce Timm, of all people, who, of course, would be one of the architects of Batman the Animated Series and one of my major heroes of animation, considering that's my favorite show ever.
No, seriously, keep fucking with me.
What's that from?
That's from my other channel I have.
Oops. Yeah, Fleischer, that's right. I think it said Fleischer, but Fleischer. Yeah, so technically Amblin, the thing that Spielberg had, and Bluth were basically a major threat to Disney by the late 80s, which is another reason why I guess they really felt the pressure to step up their game. Although, again, nobody over there seemed to think that Little Mermaid had potential to really be, the phenomenon that turned out to be. And then they went on, arguably their most successful run. Little Mermaid, and then, again, sort of an anomaly, but in there, it gets forgotten, but the sequel, The Rescuers Down Under, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and Lion King. So that's like 5 years of just like big, huge blockbuster movies that like were cultural phenomenons, not just like, big movies, but it was like Disney just sort of kept topping themselves. And I remember, I was the perfect age for that. So it's a big memory for me of like being like of that age of watching that stuff just when it was getting good, just when, DuckTales was going and the Disney afternoon when I was a little older. And again, it was a yearly event to go see the next big animated thing. And they seemed to just keep knocking it out of the park for a while. I mean, from Beauty and the Beast in 91 right up to Mulan in 98, I saw every one of them in theaters. Tarzan was the first one I didn't see, which was 99.
You didn't miss much.
No. Even in rewatching that movie, see, I think Tarzan's super boring. I would put that pretty low. Like, again, very good animation and everything. And plus, I hate Phil Collins' soundtrack to it so much. I hate it. Like Disney usually is pretty good about like their soundtracks, even when they use like pop artists, that had success, Elton John and people like that. Like I cannot stand Phil Collins' crappy soundtrack to Tarzan. It's crap. I hate it. And I don't dislike Phil Collins. I like some of his songs, but I guess I'm not a fan.
So it went Little Mermaid and then Beauty and the Beast.
Rescues Down Under in between though.
Okay. And then Aladdin.
Yeah. Then Lion King.
Yeah.
Then Pocahontas, which was the first sort of little letdown. Not that it wasn't well received, but it wasn't the massive hit. And then it was more like, again, back to sort of modest hits. So Pocahontas wasn't a flop. It did okay. Hunchback of Notre Dame. Speaking of, I always think this movie maybe even laid the ground for Hunchback of Notre Dame. Because if you're going to talk about like a movie that was closest to being PG, it would be Hunchback of Notre Dame. Because you should see it. Because for one thing, it's based on some very sophisticated source material, unlike a lot of these, right? A big novel by Victor Hugo. But also, like, it has some fairly dark and complex themes that I'm really surprised that they went for. Because it's about, the main story about, like, how he was born, considered an abomination, and, the Frollo, the cardinal guy, looks after him, but, like, even though he raises him, he's, emotionally and physically abusive towards him, and he's always teaching him that he's a monster to be shunned. And also he has this great hatred for the gypsies. But it also has one of the most complex and dark moments in Disney animation history, and it's in a villain song. Okay, so at least in the bare bones of the story probably is that, like, a beautiful young gypsy named Esmeralda becomes friends with him, right? And then there's this whole thing where Frollo is trying to get her arrested because he hates all the gypsies. But then he has this song where he's singing about hellfire, and he's literally singing about, like, how conflicted he is because he hates the gypsies and he hates everything they stand for, and he thinks, he's one of those black and white, fire and brimstone guys. They're going to go to hell and everything. But at the same time, he has sexual desire for Esmeralda, and it's tearing him apart. That's in a goddamn animated Disney movie with talking gargoyles, one voiced by Jason Alexander, for God's sake. But yeah, it's a pretty good movie, and like the artwork, like looking at Notre Dame, like it's stunning. Oh, that fire, that breaks my heart. I know sometimes people talk about, people are dying, why worry about buildings? But I mean, buildings and stuff matter because we die and we go and we're gone, but buildings and stuff endure. Doesn't make them more important to people, but I'm just saying, like art and things, they do matter. Yeah, a catastrophic fire there. But anyway, yeah, I would definitely recommend that movie. It's a good movie. And again, surprisingly mature in some of its stuff. The guy who voices, as usual in most Disney movies, if you notice, like it was kind of weird that Mel Gibson was in Pocahontas, because Disney usually doesn't go for big names, which I like. They just sort of go for whoever they think will do the character best. That's something that's kind of refreshing about the Disney animated canon, is like those movies aren't like dotted with like a who's who of stars who just happen to be around and they're like, oh, they're good, they can do the voice, which is really what they do in like the DreamWorks films and all that stuff. But anyway, so the guy that was the voice of Quasimodo in that, like the only other thing I've ever seen him in is he's the guy who plays Mozart in Amadeus. But so that's 96. 97 was Hercules, 98 was Mulan, 99 was Tarzan. I think 2000 was Dinosaur, which I don't even know if it really counts because it was CG and stuff. Was there one in 2001? I don't know. 2001 might have been 2000 or 2001 might have been The Emperor's New Groove, which I really like because it's like a weird, like, off to the side type one. It doesn't have like the grandiose scale of the others. It's just more quirky and weird. But I on record, I think that's the funniest animated one they've done. I think it's really legitimately funny. That's David Spade. Yes, I know.
They did one about like what is it, like a Mexican city.
Oh, in 2001 they did Atlantis, which is actually. Besides the Black Cauldron, might be the only other one that might be worthy of doing a show on. Because, again, it's a weird sort of failure that's been kind of reassessed. So that might be something we could do if we ever come back to this. Because, like, yeah. I mean, it's mostly sort of forgotten. It did not perform well. It tried different things. So yeah, actually, I think it has some things in common with this movie, in that it's like one of those movies that was like definitely dismissed at the time, but in the years since has gained somewhat of a following and a new appreciation. I think in particular because of Mike Mignola's influence on the design. Mike Mignola, of course, being the creator of Hellboy. I mean, if you know Hellboy and you know Mignola's work, it's very easy to see his fingerprints on that movie, which is cool, really. Think of like a Disney movie, but like Mignola aesthetic. But it really does have that. So that was 2001.
2001, yeah, was Atlantis, right? Then Pixar.
Yeah, that was kind of the beginning of the end, because then it was Pixar picking up the ball. I mean, I think Home on the Range is like 2003. And it's awful. They did a movie called Brother Bear, which I've still never seen.
I've seen it.
Which barely made a blip on the radar. The only thing that was interesting about that was like it was one of the only roles that like I think Rick Moranis has done in like the last 30 years. Wasn't Rick Moranis in that, I think?
That was 2003. I'm not sure.
And then like they didn't do anymore. And then 2009, it was almost like an experiment to do The Princess and the Frog. And I don't know, it was a pretty good movie. I thought it was well received and it had me hopeful for the future, but then they just slammed the door shut. They're like, no more 2D animation.
I mean, that's their Black Princess. That's how they got the Black Princess.
Yeah.
I mean, now they've got one of just about every shade. I don't know, you put, is Lilo a princess? You've even got a Pacific Islander in there.
No, but I mean, she's there. Oh, yeah. What year was that? That's 2002, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So that was an odd period, too.
That's a good movie. It is an odd period. But
because, I mean, Atlantis is more like the normal one by, like, scope. But then you've got, like, around it, you've got Lilo and Stitch and Emperor's New Groove, which neither were, like, the big, grand, epic that they usually try to tell. They were just more kind of quirky, small stories. They were more about, like, humor. And they worked pretty well. I mean, I like both. Yeah, I like Lilo and Stitch.
They made mini sequels to both of those.
They made sequels to everything, man.
But, I mean, I'm not even seeing them on this list. I guess they're not considered.
They're not part of the official Disney canon.
Okay. Because they made 2 sequels to Little Mermaid. They made Lion King 2 and a Lion King 2.5.
They also made Lion King 1.5, which is just basically the first Lion King from Timon and Pumbaa's view.
Yeah. They made at least 2 sequels to 101 Dalmatians. Yeah, there's...
For many years, I thought, Lion King 1.5 was really dumb, until I realized it's kind of the genius behind it. Because think about Lion King and what its story is. What does everybody say? It's Hamlet, right? So to make Lion King 1.5, which is basically the same story told from Timon and Pumbaa's voice, that's making Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. That's kind of too clever, in a way.
I've never seen 1.5.
I've seen part of it. I forget how it starts.
I think I have it. I probably own it.
Yeah,
but probably
I own so few. I'd own them all if I could. Well, almost all of them. But their damn vault, and the fact that they were always expensive and never came down in price. And now I've got less incentive to own certain ones as long as I have Disney Plus. I mean, there's so many I'd love to own. Love to own Dumbo. I sort of owned Bambi, but it was technically my sister's copy, so I don't have it anymore. But I got a lot out of it.
I made a sequel to Bambi.
What they do? Bring her mother back?
I don't know. I don't remember what happened.
Like his mother's really alive. Everything's okay now.
It's all a Jacob's Ladder scenario.
Yeah. So only 3 movies in the 60s. So I was wrong about the gap. There was actually a similar gap between The Sword and the Stone and The Jungle Book. Sword and the Stone was 63. The Jungle Book was 67. And then another 3. And then they were doing 3-year gaps for most of it. 3 years for Aristocrats, another 3 for Robin Hood, and then 4 for. So yeah, this is why the mid 70s was really the beginning of the Dark Age. Because you got Robin Hood in 73, Then you have 4 years before the next one, and the next one's not even a full feature one. It's the Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. Oh, but it's the same year as Rescuers, so actually that's not too bad for output. You know, of all those sequels, and I haven't seen most of them, Aladdin 2 is actually okay. The Return of Jafar. They also made a third one, for God's sakes, which I never saw. But Return of Jafar is pretty good as far as a straight-to-video sequel goes. I mean, yeah, look at this terrible dark. Yeah, they went into definitely a new dark age in the 2000s. I don't know how well Emperor's New Groove did or what people thought of it, but I'm going to consider it good. So I'm going to say their dark age started in 2001 with the failure of Atlantis: The Lost Empire. Lilo and Stitch did pretty well. Treasure Planet is terrible. Brother Bear, I've still never seen. Home on the Range might be the bottom of the barrel. And then we get into these awkward non-Pixar CG movies. Chicken Little, Meet the Robinsons, and Bolt, for God's sakes. I didn't even know Bolt was considered Disney, but it is. Never seen it.
It's Miley Cyrus.
Is it?
Doing the voice of Bolt, yeah.
I thought Bolt was I thought Bolt was John Travolta.
Maybe it's the girl then in the film.
Then they really righted themselves in 2009, giving me false hope with The Princess and the Frog, and then they just had those whole bunch of really good movies that alternated between Pixar and Disney's animation studio. Disney's animation studio did Tangled and Winnie the Pooh. Or no, okay, the Frozens aren't even counted on this.
Is that considered Walt Disney Animation Studios doing those?
No, Pixar is Disney, but it's considered outside this official canon we're discussing.
Frozen and Tangled are both.
Yeah. For Disney Animation Studio, you got Tangled, Wreck-It Ralph, Frozen, Big Hero 6, Zootopia, Moana, which I've never seen, Ralph Breaks the Internet, and Frozen 2. So the last two to come out were actually sequels. And I thought Ralph Breaks the Internet was a very disappointing sequel, and I thought Frozen was a pretty good sequel.
I haven't seen Frozen 2. They did Zootopia in 2006.
No, it's definitely not that old.
Big Hero 6 was good. I mean, 2016.
Yeah. The weirdest thing about Big Hero 6 is that technically Big Hero 6, that's the first Marvel property they adopted. They completely changed everything. All they did was keep the name. But Big Hero 6 was actually a Marvel comic from the late 90s that was a tribute to Japanese comics. It was about a Japanese superhero team in the Marvel universe. Most of them were made up for the comic, but it included like Sunfire, the X-Man.
That's cool. So they did that like right after they acquired Marvel.
Yeah. And they haven't done anything since, though.
I'm surprised.
I was sort of pleased because I was like, Big Hero 6 is the right thing to adapt because it's obscure. Nobody really knows it. So they can change it if they want. It's not like they're like Disney's X-Men or, they were doing something. So why don't they do something else like that? Marvel has more obscure shit. They could do something.
That was a huge catalog of shit.
I haven't even heard about this, but apparently the next Disney Animation Studios one coming out, so the newest being Frozen 2, which came out back in November, for a March 2021 date, they have a movie called Raya and the Last Dragon. I've heard nothing about this. But it will be the 59th film in the canon. Okay, who the hell is Awkwafina? Do you know who Awkwafina is? Because she's in this movie. I've heard her name.
It's an Asian actress.
But, what does she do? Why do I hear about her? Does she do something special?
She was in that, was it Big Rich Asians?
Crazy Rich Asians.
Crazy Rich Asians. And
really?
She might be a rapper, too, for all I know. I know it's spelled all weird, right?
Because she has, a TV show called, Nora from Queens or something. And every time I turn on the TV, it's a commercial for Awkwafina is Nora from Queens. They're promoting it like she's this mega star, and I don't get it.
AWK.
Yeah, I know. It's spelled really stupid.
Yeah, she is a comedian, writer, producer, rapper.
I'd never heard of her until a couple of months ago.
She had a rap song, My Vag, became popular on YouTube. That's nice.
Sounds about right.
I blew up with my vag.
Yeah, so unofficially, the years 2000 through 2009-ish are considered a second dark age, which I totally agree with because most of the movies in there aren't very good. I mean, the high point is probably Lilo and Stitch.
Lots of swings and lots of misses. Yeah. It's, they don't know what's going to hit. Like you said, Little Mermaid, that was kind of a fluke in their eyes.
Yeah.
It was a big risk.
Yeah, it was.
But, hindsight is like, oh man, that turned out great. That's like most people's favorite Disney movie.
Yeah, especially people like about our age.
Right.
As I said, like people our age were sort of in on the ground floor for this because we were like of the target age audience right when Disney was really hitting its stride and bringing things back. Because, growing up as a little kid, I knew Disney had these great classic movies, and it's true. But I didn't really know any of the '80s movies. Didn't hear anything about them, and then then it's like they just reasserted their dominance with Little Mermaid, and then went from there. And it's like boom, Disney.
I remember Little Mermaid back when the VHS cover had the penises on it.
Yeah. I think I have that. Hold on.
Awesome. This was a big controversy. There was a few Disney properties that the animators inserted little hidden, I guess, Easter eggs, you'd call them, for some of the adults. There's one rumor in Lion King where it's like dust gets whipped up, and they say it spells out.
I don't. I think maybe in my parents' house we have that one, but the one I own is a re-release. It's a special edition, so it's this.
So no phallus at all on there.
But I think that is at my parents' house. This is one I picked up secondhand. It's a bit chewed on the side, but I do have some of the originals that are actually worth a fair amount of money. Like I have Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin, like the original versions intact, and they're quite well intact. Those sell for quite a bit.
That's the big clamshell, right? The big clamshell case?
Yeah, they all have these, yeah.
They're nice. I don't have very many. I know I have Lion King because I saw it last night.
We never owned Lion King, which is the weird one. And I don't think my mother ever even saw Lion King. It was only a few months ago. Or during Christmas. Right after Christmas, when I got Disney Plus, my mother was like, I've still never seen Lion King. I was like, let's watch it. She hadn't seen it, although she'd seen others. But yeah, actually, at one point, we had 3 copies of Beauty and the Beast. Because what happened was, we bought Beauty and the Beast, like a lot of people did. But then, like a year or two later, we had a Woolworths downtown. It was a big store that we went to a lot. And it was going out of business. And it was selling stuff really cheap. And we got like 2 copies for like 50 cents each.
That's cool.
That's also how I have Final Fantasy II, the Super Nintendo game, on cartridge. I got it at the Woolworths. Like it wasn't sold with the box, which is unfortunate. It was just like sold as like a repackaged game, but still pretty cool to have it.
Just a warning: don't search Little Mermaid penis.
Well, we got some mermaid futanari, probably.
Yeah, there's quite a lot. I'm kind of into it. Anyway, yeah, it's kind of a stretch, really. I mean, the cover of that thing. I mean, yeah, I could see, but it doesn't look intentional,
Yeah. Remember how dumb it was for the one in Lion King?
That's what I was saying right before you came back on. Yeah.
Oh yeah, where he collapses and the dust goes up. It's not sex. It's supposed to be SFX for like sound effects or special effects or something, and it doesn't even look like sex.
No.
You just imagine like these weird, like I don't know who they are, Christian fundamentalists or whatever. They're like watching everything and like pausing stuff and writing stuff down. This is like, this says "devil you" backwards.
Constant scrutinizing of everything, like they're trying to like brainwash you with their, devil whatever.
Yeah.
What is it? I think it's The Rescuers that has a pretty big one in it, or did.
Big what?
Big, one of the hidden, like Easter egg type things.
Oh, maybe. That's another one I'm going to watch soon because I haven't seen the original Rescuers in a long, long time. I like ones like that are just like weird and creative. Weird. It's so weird that like before it's one of the only movies in the canon that got a sequel, and even weirder that the sequel is like over a decade later.
Mm-hmm.
Rescuers Down Under is not nearly as good as Rescuers. I remember that. The thing that's notable at Rescuers Down Under is that although, as we said, the Black Cauldron actually being the first, and a couple of the other 80s movies did use computer animation. Really, the first movie where you can really see it and appreciate it is Rescue is Down Under, because there's like scenes of them like flying on the bird, and it's, you know, CG and 3D-ish and stuff. It looks really good. Like, I couldn't even tell you what is computer generated in the Black Cauldron unless it's that part with like the undead warriors coming out.
I've seen some of the stuff. It almost looks like rotoscoping.
Yeah, there was a term for it too. Shit.
It's not rotoscoping, but it looked a little similar to me.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I had a thing that was talking about that, and I clicked off it. See if I can find it again.
Here it is.
Oh, they did something called animation photo transfer process, shortened as the APT process. That's what it is. Enhance the technology by which the rough animation will be processed onto celluloid. First, the rough animation would be photographed into high-contrast lithofilm, and the resulting negative would be copied onto the plastic cell sheets. It would transfer lines and the colors, which eventually eliminated the hand-inking process. But as the APT transferred line art would fade off the cells over time, most of all the film was done using the xerographic, I guess it's like Xerox, process, which has been in place in Disney since the late 50s. Yeah. So the APT thing was pretty short-lived because CGI effects would render it obsolete. So that's another thing that makes this movie kind of unique, that it used what was considered cutting edge sort of at the time, and it was very quickly surpassed. I really like cell animation.
I do too. I'm a sucker for all that stuff.
I know we talked a great deal about it when we did Akira, which might be one of the greatest examples of cell animation there is.
Like, I miss just having cells. Like, you can get cells of things, you know, and, you know, like as a, you know, keepsake or whatever.
Yeah. So by the time you get into the 90s and the Renaissance is going, we were talking about how at one point, only a few years earlier, Disney was being threatened by the competition from Bluth and Amblin. Now they were just crushing the competition left and right. I mean, do you know what came out opposite The Lion King? The Swan Princess. There's a forgettable piece of shit.
What studio did that?
That's a good question. Not sure. But what's interesting is that The Swan Princess was actually done by Richard Rich, who is one of the main animators on this film. Yeah, that was his name, Richard Rich. And he was he one of the guys that was on and came out? I had him written down somewhere. Richard Rich either worked on this film and then was replaced, or he's one of the guys that replaced somebody else. Thought I had it written down.
Name sounds familiar.
Oh, okay, yeah. He's one of the directors. Remember I said two guys directed this film? Rich is one of them. Ted Berman and Richard Rich. They both co-directed the last one, Fox and the Hound, and they co-directed this one. Anyway, by the 90s, Rich had left Disney, and he's the main he's the director of the Swan Princess, which is a piece of shit. Around the same time, there was also, I don't know what studio did what was it called, like Quest for Camelot or something, which is also terrible. And if you want to talk about a movie that can somehow surpass the awful comedic relief character throwaway garbage that is Gurgi, Quest for Camelot does that by having a character that is a chicken that is turned into like an axe, so it's like half axe, half chicken, and it's voiced by Urkel.
Oh shit!
So that, I think, wins the prize for absolute worst, most annoying comedic relief animated character.
Half axe, half chicken.
Yeah, it was this thing. So the bad guy in this, it's really stupid. So there's this big, I don't even remember what the plot is, but there's a big bad guy, you know, he wants to take over the world, etc., etc. He gains access to some sort of like magic potion or something that if you put it on a living creature, they like grow like weapon appendages. So like you could have like a sword for an arm. And during that, like a chicken falls in and its body turns into like an axe, and its face is the blade, and it just sort of bounces around in the movie, and Urkel does the voice, and it's awful, as you might imagine.
Blade beak.
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, that's the bad guy's big plan, that he can like turn people into like hybrid weapon people.
That sounds cool, though.
It sounds cool, but it's not. The movie also has like a blind guy that, sees better than everybody. And the weirdest part about that movie to me, besides that what I just said, is that, do you remember a song called The Prayer in the 90s that a lot of people did versions of? Later on, like Josh Groban would do it with Charlotte Church, but Celine Dion would do it too. It's this really like spiritual song. Let this be our prayer. Blah, 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 blah. That's in that movie. And they use it in a completely out of context way. It plays while good guys are like running away from bad guys. It makes no sense. You can probably find it on YouTube. It looks like somebody like just replaced the original soundtrack and put the prayer over it because it in no way fits.
They're like, we've got the rights to this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, essentially, yeah. I can't sing that song, unfortunately. It's not my range.
Did also do that?
What's that?
Richard Rich did that as well.
Oh, did he?
No, I'm asking. I don't know.
Oh, I'm not sure. I wouldn't be surprised because it has a lot of similarities to Swan Princess to the point that I sometimes even mix them up. See if I can find some info on that.
That Swan Princess looks like Rich Animation Studios, his own production company.
No, this is from Warner Brothers Animation. It came out in 98. Okay, for some reason I thought it was a lot earlier. I thought it was mid-90s. So Quest for Camelot's actually 98, and it's from Warner Brothers Animation. What the hell did they do? And guess what? Gary Oldman's the villain because he was the villain for everything in the 90s.
I mean, aside from like Looney Tunes shit, not much in the way of animation.
I mean, not only does Quest for Camelot have Urkel, it also has Don Rickles, for God's sakes.
How many times have you said Don Rickles? Like, what the fuck is up with this guy?
Was I talking about him recently?
No, you didn't say Don Rickles. You said somebody else. Dom DeLuise. That's right.
Oh, yeah, Dom DeLuise. No, what's up with Dom DeLuise is that he's in all the Bluth movies, and he's even in a Disney movie, Oliver and Company. But obviously, Dom DeLuise had a strong relationship with Bluth because he's in all his movies, or at least all of them up to a point. I don't remember when Dom DeLuise died. He died quite a while ago.
So, Quest for Camelot, we've got Gabrielle Byrne, Jaleel White.
Yeah, Jaleel White, that's his name. I keep saying Urkel. Yeah.
Bronson Pinchot, Steve Perry, Pierce Brosnan, Celine Dion, James Seymour, Eric Idle, for God's sakes.
Carrie Ellis.
What the hell, man?
And it's crap. And it's such a blatant Disney ripoff, too. Like, it's them trying so hard to be Disney. It's really weird. It's even weirder than it sounds. Besides that, like, axe creature, Don Rickles actually plays a two-headed dragon. I think he plays both heads. And also, the blind guy seems to have, like, powers that control plants or something. It's really messed up.
Fuck.
All the rich tapestry.
So it's just like a King Arthur like adaptation.
Yeah. Yeah, there's like some specific story based on the legend that this is based on, but I'm not familiar with it. As I said, the dark age of animation, while having a lot of cheapness to it, it did still produce some good things. For instance, this is when the classic Peanuts animated movies were made, and I love those to death. Mm-hmm. And even sort of the cheapness about them is something I like. I like the look. So it's not like everything was bad during that time. And a lot, it was really when like stuff like Hanna-Barbera ruled, right? And I just can't bring myself to like most of Hanna-Barbera. To me, it just feels half-assed and crappy. I've never been a fan of pretty much anything they do. Is Rocky and Bullwinkle part of that? That was one I used to watch a lot as a kid. That was sort of a late night show that would come on. Oh, that was just a one-note type thing. But it still had some decent quality within it. So, while it was considered a dark age, it doesn't mean it was completely bereft of quality. There was some quality in there. It's just that the approach to animation was done just so different back then. And it was really because of a weird split that happened after the 40s and going into the 50s, where like people were just like, okay, Disney has established themselves as like, they're the main guys with animation, and they've established that animation is for children, and we'll just go from there. And that's why somebody like Ralph Bakshi is such an interesting figure, because he came up during this era and, sort of raged against it in a way. And we did another film that was a big, what's the word, anomaly of this era, because it broke the conventions, and that was Watership Down. That's one of our older episodes if people want to check that out, which I think is the ultimate example for a lot of people, in that it took a lot of people by surprise. And I don't just mean back then, I mean even now, like people that hear about that movie, if they don't know what they're in for, they're quite confused to this day, because it's an animated movie about rabbits. So that sounds, pretty par for the course. And then you get into this dark, disturbing, violent thing that it is, and yeah.
Well, it's almost like it's what Disney. The Black Cauldron should have been similar in tone to that film.
Right. It could have been Disney's way to break out of it.
Right.
I mean, Disney broke out of, as we said, the animation age ghetto was its own thing, which was a symptom of the dark age. Disney broke out of the dark age in a different way, but the animation age ghetto was basically shattered, not even by West. It was just Eastern influence. There really wasn't any big, even despite Bakshi's efforts and despite something unique like Watership Down and the follow-up by the director, what was it, the dog one, something dogs, really there was no Western. There was no like one Western show or movie that did it. It was simply eventually getting more access to the anime and people saying, oh, okay, which really happened in the 90s.
I mean, adult animation is an entire, separate thing now. Like, I mean, Disney could have got in on the ground floor on that, had they had the balls. Because, I mean, this film flops the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they could have released it, unedited to maybe a slightly older audience.
I think that's what's really too bad about it, is like, even now, if you can get it, you can get like its Blu-ray release, which does exist. It doesn't restore those cut scenes.
It does have the cut scenes in it, though?
No, it doesn't. That's what I mean, is we don't get to see them. There's no version where we can see that. Online, you can find I don't think you can actually find you can at least find stills. I've seen stills of some of like the scarier images and stuff that was cut out. Let's see here. I'm just going to look really quick. Yeah, so it's got its first VHS release in '97, but that was only in the UK. So it finally got a home video release on VHS in August of '98 as part of the Walt Disney Masterpiece Collection. I remember that. And it was fairly bare bones. And then in 2000, as part of the Walt Disney Gold Classic Collection line, they did another version. What's really weird is that it, instead of having any cool extras about it, you know what it had? It had the 1952 Donald Duck short, Trick or Treat, which is a classic short. I love that short, but why is it on the Black Cauldron release? In 2008, Disney announced a special edition DVD to be released in 2009, but it didn't come out. It was re-advertised as the 25th anniversary edition and released on September 14th, 2010. Oh, it does have deleted scenes. Okay, I'm definitely going to get it then. I think I was speaking to my sister tonight, and I was told what we were going to do. She said she has that, so.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I'll have to track that down. So it has all the features from the 2000 DVD release, but it also has a widescreen transfer and deleted scenes. It doesn't say all the deleted scenes, but it does say deleted scenes. That's interesting. crazy is back in '86 they made a video game of this. But since I love talking about eras and things like that, we talked on a few things. The dark age of animation, the animation age ghetto, and the Disney dark age were all entwined. Something else that I just love about the 80s was it was kind of, to me, the golden age of just the fantasy film. And we've done a few from that on this show. Like I said, we did a really good one in Willow, and we did a not so great one, but kind of interesting one in Fire and Ice, the Ralph Bakshi. But I mean, I just think so many fantasy films. That was just the era. Like, I think it really kicked off with the Excalibur film I think it was '81, which I'd really like to see again. I haven't seen in a while. Which sort of got that seemed to be the one. That seemed to be the one that kicked things off, because right after that you had Conan the Destroyer, or just the first Conan, and then of course Conan the Destroyer. So you had the two Conan movies. The first one being in '82. There were quite a few like lesser known swords and sorcery movies, but then just as far as fantasy goes, yeah, you got my favorite of the decade, The Dark Crystal in '92, the other Jim Henson movie, Labyrinth of '86, Willow in '88,
Red Sonja,
a particularly bad one, but there it is. And I know there's plenty I'm forgetting and blanking on, but a lot of really good ones. Oh, one of my favorites ever is Return to Oz.
Okay.
That's '85. So yeah, I really think of like the '80s as like the golden age of the fantasy film. You know, the fantasy film followed sort of a similar thing of zombie films, and that zombies had built up a certain amount of popularity through the '70s and '80s, and then in the '90s died. And it was the same thing with fantasy films; they died. There's almost nothing. And then 2000, there's one, Beastmaster. Yeah, quite a few lesser ones. I think I told you there's a hilarious one that I'll have to look up again that I rented years ago that I watched with a friend. I don't know if it was Ryan or who it was, but man, it was hilarious. And it was like about a guy that like getting like this weird 3-bladed sword, and it was crazy, and everybody runs around in loincloths. And one of the barbarian guys that's in his group is the guy that played Frank Fontana on Murphy Brown, and he looks ridiculous because he looks exactly the same. I can't remember what it's called though. Landstalker or something. I don't know. What's funny is like back in 2017, they said they were going to make a sequel to it, but it didn't seem to happen. It was so dumb. Oh, also the He-Man movie, Masters of the Universe, came out in '87.
Yeah.
That definitely counts. So not a good one, but a weird one. But yeah, I just think the '80s, Howard the Duck, there's one of the worst ones.
I just call that.
And of course the Star Wars. The Star Wars movies are, to a certain extent, you know, I always consider them more fantasy than sci-fi, although of course they have the sci-fi element to them. But yeah, I always think, the '80s is definitely to me the decade of fantasy. Slashers too, of course, which we've talked about on other shows. But the early 2000s saw sort of a renaissance of fantasy with the Lord of the Rings movies and the Harry Potter movies coming out around the same time as each other. And now we live in an era of like, we get fantasy movies all the time now, but they're all the same. They're all like ones based on young adult novels, and they're all just about like sexy teens and stuff, and they're not very good. And they all blend together, you know. You got Divergent, of course, the Twilight movies. So it's either stuff like teens that like fight supernatural forces, or it's about teens that live in weird dystopian futures. Hunger Games, you know. And I don't consider it a good era because I don't think any of them are good. Of all the ones that I've actually seen, I'd say the Maze Runner might be the least bad. I don't know if I'd call it good, but it might be the least bad.
They made a few sequels to that too, didn't they?
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing a sequel to it because the first one is at least passably good. It's another one of those movies where, since it's like a fantasy world, everything has to have like its own stupid name. And I don't know. And they're just bland and forgettable names. Like, those are the hunters. We call this the this, and those are the gatherers. And like everything's the this, the this. And I get it. You have to name things. I just have a real problem with people that give things bad names, I guess. It really started with The Matrix. It's okay in the first Matrix, but once you get into the sequels, everything is so dumb. It's like the Oracle, the Gatekeeper, the this. I hate it. I really hate that stuff.
The film you were talking about is The Sword and the Sorcerer.
Oh, yeah. Man, you found that pretty fast. Yeah, I would recommend seeing it. It's hilarious.
I haven't seen it.
It's hilarious. But anyway, And another really, really bad one. I think I've talked about it before years ago because I stumbled upon it completely by accident on TV once. It's so bad. It's called Wizards of the Lost Kingdom. The main character is played by Bo Svensson, who was the guy that was in those Walking Tall movies in the 70s. And he plays like a lone mercenary guy, and he teams up with this kid who's like going to be like a wizard. It's so bad. It's like low budget 80s crap fest, and like the whole ending part is just like supposed to be like this climactic battle between the wizard kid and an evil wizard, and it really all it results is in this. They're like in a courtyard of a castle, and basically their powers come from rings they're wearing. So this is what they do. They go and like a beam shoots out, and they just keep teleporting around. So a guy will appear somewhere and he'll go shoot the beam. The other guy will teleport out of the way, land on another turret, and he'll go. Like, and that's like their expression. There's like no expression on the face. They actually made a sequel to it that I saw not too recently or not too long ago, because the sequel is one of the ones that like Mystery Science 3000 did. They did the sequel, which they did get Bo Svensson back for because he's Bo Svensson.
Sounds like Captain Planet, the way you're talking about the old those rings.
Yeah, but at least in Captain Planet, when they use the rings, they yell stuff. They go, fire, wind. This is completely no expression and no dialogue, just going. And then like a weird, shitty effect beam just shoots out. So like even less exciting than Captain Planet. Yeah, you know how even tonight I've talked about how movies I watch line up weird in my life, like what I was saying about watching Copland and the director of that being the writer of things. So one of the weirder ones was back in the spring of 2003. That was when I saw Wizards of the Lost Kingdom. And it was when I was living in an apartment with my friend Shane and my sister. And Shane and I watched the movie and laughed our asses off at just finding it on TV one day. Only a few weeks later, and that's why I looked up Bo Svensson. At the time, I didn't know who he was or anything, so I looked him up. Then a few weeks later, I was watching the Leafs in the playoffs, because they actually used to make the playoffs back in those days. And we were all supposed to go see Kill Bill Volume 2. And I couldn't go. I was like, you guys go. This is going to overtime. I'll go late if I have to. And the Leafs won, and I hustled down to the theater, and I got there about 15, 20 minutes late. I didn't know at the time, and it wasn't until I got to rewatch the movie later, that in the opening scenes of those movies, it's a flashback to when she first gets attacked, when she's having her wedding, and it's in black and white. Remember, and Bill's team shows up, and they kill everybody at the wedding and shoot her in the head. Like, in that scene, like, I think Samuel L. Jackson's in there. He's one of the guys at the church, and somebody plays the organ. Anyway, one of the preacher is Bo Svensson. Bo Svensson is like the minister or whatever in that scene. So that's pretty funny.
Gotta tell you, man, the poster art for that looks fucking terrible.
Wizards of the Lost Kingdom? Well, that fits because everything about it is terrible. It's cheap garbage, horribly acted, horrible effects, horrible costumes, horrible plot. But it's actually worth watching because it's so dumb and funny.
That's a 2.7 on IMDb.
That's about right. So yes, while there was the golden age of fantasy in the 80s, plenty of terrible fantasy came out at the same time. But we talked about it before when we did other shows. Like the 90s, it was like a wasteland for fantasy. There was almost none, at least as far as like anything that was like popular or good. I think we talked about it when we did our show on Children of Children, The City of Lost Children. Because we were saying that was kind of like a rare fantasy-esque movie of the 90s, even though, again, it was fairly, obscure at the time, being a French film. But really, there was not a lot of fantasy going on in the 90s. But these things always seem to run in cycles. I can't wait till Westerns make a huge comeback.
They keep trying. I don't think they're going to. I don't know that fantasy is either, not at least the sword and sorcery that we were familiar with.
No, now, like I said, fantasy now is like supernatural horror, but for teens, and dystopian future stuff. That's kind of more sci-fi than fantasy, anyway.
Yeah,
but I don't know. There is more stuff that can be adapted. I mean, they did a really good job of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, so that opens the door for other similar sort of fantasies being done. I don't know. I'd always be conflicted about something from Forgotten Realms being adapted. Forgotten Realms is like a huge fantasy setting from Dungeons and Dragons. I never played Dungeons and Dragons, but they made many, many spin-off novels, many of which I've read over the years, and I especially love the ones by author R.A. Salvatore, as I talked about. And it seems like you could do some really great movies or something, or even a show based on his stuff with the effects we have now that we could finally show a dark elf the way he's supposed to look and stuff. But yeah.
Right.
Of all like the classic high fantasy setting, you know, the setting with wizards and elves and dwarves and dragons, that's by far my favorite. I like it even more than Lord of the Rings, which is sort of unfair. I mean, Lord of the Rings was first, but it builds everything. But you wouldn't have it without Lord of the Rings.
I mean, it's awfully big shoes to fill. I mean, you've got a series that is damn near perfection.
Yeah.
You know, and then you see, you know, what The Hobbit turned into, which I haven't seen, but I've heard is not the best.
Well, it's stretching it out. The 3 movies was just ridiculous. Just all this filler, all this ridiculous filler. The first movie is at least passable, but don't watch the rest. I'd say the first one, the first one's called An Unexpected Journey. It's pretty much worth a watch. The other 2, you're just like, oh, who cares? Like, I watched it to finish it off because you want to see the rest of the story, but. And what's weird is there's even, just like the Lord of the Rings, there's even extended versions of those that are longer than the theatrical versions. I actually own the first one. I don't remember if mine has the extended cut or not, but I definitely would not own the other 2, where they're just shoehorning people in. They're like, hey, remember Legolas? He wasn't in The Hobbit, but we like him, so now he's part of this, you know? And one of the dwarves will have a subplot where he's like romantically involved with an elf for some reason. Like,
yeah, I don't know.
It's just too much filler. It could have been like either one really long movie or at most 2 movies, but 3 really long movies? That's ridiculous. The Hobbit, a lot happens in The Hobbit, but it's not like an epic saga like The Lord of the Rings is, which is 3 really big books.
I mean, they could have made 4 movies out of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
I mean, as long as they are. I mean, fuck. You know, you watch the uncut versions, it's like, what, 12 hours long or something?
Yeah, it's about that. Because the first 2 are well over 3 hours, and the third one is 4 hours. I own them. I haven't watched them in a while because they're quite the commitment, but they still stand up as really great movies. I don't love everything about them, of course. I'm one of those Lord of the Rings purists that loves all the stuff out of the books. But I mean, I recognize them as very good adaptations. The first one, especially, I love Fellowship. That's one of my favorite movies of all time. I've talked many times about 2001 being my favorite year in film. That's from 2001.
I'm just surprised Peter Jackson wanted to do another epic, trilogy right after he just did one. But
what's weird is like he wasn't initially, and I don't even remember why it fell through. Remember for a while, people were talking about Guillermo del Toro doing it. And I know this is an unpopular position because obviously the Hobbit movies did not turn out well, but I still think we dodged a bullet. I still don't think we wanted to see Guillermo del Toro's Hobbit. I think that would have been worse. I think it would have been tonally off. And I'm a fan of Guillermo del Toro, of course I am. But I'm just saying I don't think the Hobbit would have been the right thing for him to do anyway.
I don't know.
Anyway, I guess we can probably wrap up. But as I said, this is one of the ones where the movie is sort of less important than the circumstances surrounding the movie, the history leading up to it, and the effect it had, etc. The movie itself is what it is. It's just an hour and 20 minutes long. Stuff was cut out of it. The characters are fairly bland and not memorable. Some of the characters are flat out annoying, and so much stuff is cut that like they have very little to do. So it's no wonder the movie did fail. And yet, I think we both believe that Disney thought it failed for different reasons. Disney thought it's too damn dark. It's scaring all the children, and we need to go back to singing. And that's what they did, and it worked out fine. But I just think, no, it failed because, well, the stuff we said, plus it might have been better, and then Katzenberg went wild and made them cut anything that might have added some actual substance to it. But even if you had that, as we said, like the voice acting is like, no one's trying. John Hurt's the only one trying. No one else is trying. The characters don't really have any memorable traits beyond being annoying. Some of them serve no purpose at all, like the Bard guy. Like, what's he even there for? Just to make comments. He doesn't contribute a damn thing. And I know the Disney movies aren't particularly long, but some of the scenes are just too quick. Like, they see the fairies for like 5 minutes. They see the witches for like 5 minutes. And then we're on to the next thing. It would be nice if those scenes were a little more fleshed out. There are good things going for the movie. Like I said, I really love the visual style. The art style is really good. It's gorgeous. Great colors and everything. Really great concept designs. So many that we didn't even get to see because they were discarded. But what's in there looks really great. I think it is the best animated movie of the 80s as far as how it looks. It looks better than the others. Of course, it's a harder thing to compare. Like The Fox and the Hound is like a movie that takes place, out in the country in the woods. And Great Mouse Detective takes place in London in the 1890s. And of course, Oliver and Company takes place in New York. Those are all interesting, environments, but they can't compare to this cool classic fantasy environment with the castles and dark forests and mountains and stuff, which, again, it's too bad we don't get to see a bit more of. I love the castle. The establishing shot of the castle is awesome.
Him climbing up it looks really cool.
It has a really good soundtrack that, once again, is underused. Entire parts of it aren't even in the movie. To get the full experience, you have to buy the soundtrack. And I've listened to a bit of it on YouTube last week, and it is really good. It's a really great moment for Elmer Bernstein, or whatever his name is. So there is a lot going for this movie. And, I mean, obviously, if you're one of the people that actually currently has Disney Plus, then absolutely it's worth a watch. But if you're not, I'm not saying, go out of your way to find it or look for it. But if you have Disney Plus, you have access to it anyway, I would say give it a watch. It's interesting that Jay can remember it from when he was younger, because it didn't exist. This was like Disney's like failure, and they wanted to bury it. They didn't show it anywhere, and to this day, finally it has the Blu-ray release, and it is on Disney Plus. But for so many years, they just basically didn't acknowledge that it existed. And there's still some other lingering stuff, like as we said, in that Eleni, or whatever her name is not considered part of the pantheon of Disney princesses, even though she's a legitimate princess. My God, prisoness, losing it. But again, maybe in the original story that serves a purpose. In this story, it serves no purpose. She introduces herself. I'm Princess blah, blah, blah. We don't know what she's princess of. We don't know how she got there. We don't know any political ramifications if the Horned King is trying to take over her kingdom. And when the movie ends, she just walks off into the sunset with the rest of them. It's not like I have to get back to my kingdom or my family. It's like, I'm a princess because these movies generally have princesses.
Right.
So stupid. Yeah, I'll have to look up the book and see if what's the deal with her, if she's a princess, and if they actually fucking talk about it or do anything with it. Because in this movie, she's a princess in name only, and it means nothing.
Right. Exactly. It's just, that's what you do. You got the princess,
Right.
They're like, well, she's not just some regular girl.
Taran is an annoying protagonist. He's whiny and bland. And Gurgi ranks among the worst of comedic side characters.
He's like Jar Jar Binks level annoying.
He really is, yeah. I mean, just replace him with anything and the movie's better.
Anything.
Why couldn't they have a loyal dog or something?
I like that one little, whatever the hell he was, a troll with one big eye and one closed eye.
Oh, right. Yeah, we didn't talk about him. John Hurt had a little assistant guy that was sort of like a little hunchback going around. He was kind of like his ego, where he's like, yes, master. Yeah, he was okay.
Yeah, but I remember him. I remember the distinct look of his character.
Yeah, he was like a little goblin type thing.
But I mean, he should have been Furby or whatever his name is, Gorgie.
Yeah. And the Undead Army looks really great for the whole 30 seconds you get to see them. And I love how they just hammer home how much Taran isn't a hero and can never be one. Because at least in the original script and maybe in some deleted scenes, he even kills some soldiers. But they're like, nope, can't have that. Can't have the princess getting her dress torn and showing off some of her figure,
Yeah, how bad could that have been? I mean,
I know. I really doubt it was going to show a lot, right? That's not the tone of the movie. It wasn't going to go full Fire and Ice.
Oh, Bush.
Remember Fire and Ice, which is just the chick running around in the skimpiest clothing of it. She might as well be naked because she's just wearing tiny threads over her nipples and ass crack.
That's a complete polar opposite of this film.
Yeah.
They like go on it hard, you know. They're like, not only are we going that direction, we're going hard in that direction.
Yeah, it's really the Conan style, right? Which is like really strong stereotypes, big burly manly man, and big buxom babes, and that's all there is. Now this is more sort of like the classical fairy tale esque, which is I'm sure why Disney liked it, but still had things to separate itself from the typical fairy tale, but they clamped down on it in the end, so it didn't really matter. But so. As we said, we have no idea how history would have gone if this movie had succeeded, or if the movie, we'll say, had succeeded because it was actually better, because maybe they didn't make the cuts or didn't face the turmoil it had, because it had 4 years of a fairly troubled production with two forces always opposing each other in the older guard versus the newer guard, constantly clashing. You had various people that worked on the movie for a while and then either were fired or left of their own volition. As we said, of note, you could even throw Tim Burton made almost no contribution to this movie, but it still counts as like the last thing he did with Disney before moving on, or last animated thing he did with Disney before moving on. I'm surprised in reading that quote by the author of the book that he seemed to think the movie was okay, even though he said the movie's nothing like the book. I guess he was trying to be as diplomatic as possible, so good for him.
Yeah, I cashed my checks.
If it was my book, I'd be like, what the fuck did you do? But, But anyway, that's the Black Cauldron. Yeah, I think we squeezed out quite a good amount of discussion about it. As I said, ever since we did the Black Hole several years ago, I realized this movie would be great to do for very similar reasons, being a Disney movie that's fairly obscure and forgotten, ambitious, and basically a failure, and almost, wiped from history because of the ramifications it had. But in a way, it's at least indirectly responsible for the Disney Renaissance going, because maybe if they hadn't hit bottom so hard, they wouldn't, they might have limped on for a few more years. And as I don't know how exaggerated the reports are, but I've read enough different sources saying that this movie very nearly killed their animation department altogether, which is unfathomable to think of, because that's, the main thing you associate with Disney even today, despite all the friggin' properties they bought up. Must be so weird now being a kid growing up. What do you even think Disney is anymore? Disney is Spider-Man. Yeah, Disney is Darth Vader. No, Disney wasn't those things. Now Disney's just stuff it buys and takes over.
Yeah, exactly. You go to Disney World now, and I know you've been there before, but
a million years ago, yeah.
But it's nothing like it
That's
was.
What I mean. Yeah, if I went there now, it'd be completely unrecognizable. There'd be dancing stormtroopers and stuff.
It used to be this, but now it's the Skywalker, whatever,
Yeah.
And this is now the Spider-Man hangout, whatever. Which I get it. Some of that shit gets outdated, needs to be replaced. Outdated characters, outdated rides, but
sure, but
some stuff had charm to me that I liked, But
as I said, I respected Disney more when they were actually creating things. And I realized that like a lot of their animated pantheon or whatever comes from pre-existing stuff, but this wasn't like specific properties for the most part. For the most part, it was like public domain fairy tales.
Right.
But I was going to ask, like, for some of that, like, how come there aren't any other Cinderella movies? Does Disney own Cinderella somehow?
It must.
Like, because that's the thing. When you're thinking about certain of these characters, we think of the Disney version, but that's only one version, because like almost none of them are the original. Again, sometimes some of these movies are based on a particular specific property, like Hunchback of Notre Dame. It's based on an actual specific novel, things like that. The Jungle Book is based on an actual novel, even though it's very loose, and things like that. And Tarzan is based on a series of novels. So anytime Tarzan stuff comes up, you have to see Edgar Rice Burroughs' name. But there's all sorts of like things like Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, etc., that are like just, I thought, public domain things, but you don't see other versions of them. Is that because nobody would dare compete with Disney, or did Disney somehow finagle the rights to something that I didn't think you could own? But I don't know. But I mean, so yeah, they made what for a generation of us, generations, plural of us, thought, sort of definitive versions of fairy tale characters. Plus they had their own classic characters like Mickey and Donald and Goofy, and things like that. And they still have that stuff, but now it's just more like, hey, here's a really popular property. Now Disney owns it. you know. And I'm not saying that Disney can't do good things with existing properties, and I give credit to their restraint with Marvel. Like, they bought Marvel back in 2011, and it hasn't really changed the comics. It's not like Disney's come in and tried to like replace a bunch of artists and writers or tell them to do a different direction or anything like that. And there's still plenty of mature stuff going on. Again, at the time, their acquisition of Marvel was more about not the comics. You know, it was about, you know, movies and TV shows, which is all well and good, I guess. Although, how many times can you make a Spider-Man show? Are you ever going to make a good one, or are you just going to keep making crappy ones for the next like 15 years? And one more bitch about Disney Plus. How come not all the Spider-Man shows are on there? How come you've really weird, even Spider-Woman, which most people didn't even know existed, from the late 70s, the Jessica Drew one, that's on there. So how come like Spectacular Spider-Man isn't on there? That's from only a few years ago. But anyway.
Yeah. It's like to some people, Spider-Man is only that origin story and nothing else.
He's just constantly in high school.
Always.
Like every event that ever happened to him in his entire career, which is a floating timeline, is now crammed into high school. Venom happened in high school, you know?
I want to see a 35-year-old Spider-Man.
Secret Wars happened in high school. Like all this stuff. Like high school was such a small part of him in the comics. And I know comics have a floating timeline. They go glacially slow, and they eventually get to a point where they don't move forward anymore because they can't. Might as well do this since we have a little bit more time, but because like you have to sort of round off years, and sometimes certain artists and writers just discourage, you know, just throw it out the window when they start anyway. But generally in the Marvel universe, Spider-Man is about 25, 26. That's where he is now. Cyclops is about 30. Somebody like Kitty Pryde is like 20. She came in as a 13-year-old, and they've aged her up a bit and moved other characters around. So characters do have like ages that they've sort of made it to over time and stopped that. But they have to stop them eventually, or it just won't work anymore. That's why you worry about certain people. Like if Magneto's like Holocaust origin is still there, he should be like dead. And yet he looks like he's in his 50s. So and that's something that people are really concerned about going forward with the movies. Because some people are just like, well, it's easy enough to figure out ways to like make characters, you know, stop aging and stuff. And some people say just revamp it, and other people say no, like, and I guess it's important to certain people, particularly like Jewish people, and say no, like it's important that that's part of his origin, that he was, you know, a Jew that was living through the Holocaust. So I guess, but it's sooner or later you have to move stuff forward. You know, when the Punisher was first introduced, he'd fought in Vietnam. Well, not anymore. Because if he fought in Vietnam now, he's in his like mid-60s at the least. So, floating timeline. But yeah, so Spider-Man's still basically mid to late 20s. I don't think they'd push him past 30, which I'm fine with. And every once in a while, you know, you get alternate continuities where you can make an older person if you want, which is one of the things they do in the Spider-Man multiverse movie that they just did a lot. That everybody loves. I think it's fine, but I don't know. I'm not interested in alternate universes. I want to see Spider-Man, but anyway, it's fine. I'm glad people like it. It's creative. It looks really cool. But I don't know. It seemed more important to like make Spider-Man seem hip and I don't know.
Urban.
I mean, I really resent Miles Morales, and I don't know how to spin that without sounding like, you know, like one of those assholes that like a comic gator, which I am absolutely not. I think those people are scum and shit, and I hope they die. No, I don't hope they die, but they suck. Like, oh, comics need to remain white and pure and blah blah. Like, no, they don't say it in those words, but that's what they are. Every once in a while, since I follow various artists and writers on Twitter, something like them attacking them will come up at some point. Actually, lately, when this whole thing, Corona thing started happening, you know, and it's really hurting a lot of industries, including the comics industry. Like a lot of these comics gators guys were like delighting in it, and they started a hashtag called Pencils Down. It doesn't even make any sense. They seem to think that like the comic industry getting like really hurt by the current situation regarding an international health crisis is somehow their comeuppance for like writing like more progressive or woke comics or whatever, which they think are like ruining the world.
Woke.
They're just sad little bitches. Anyway, that's enough tangents. So thanks so much for being with us tonight. Yeah, it's been a while since we did an animated film and a long time since we did a Disney film. So it's, kind of a rare unicorn because we don't usually touch on something like that. But as we said, because of what this movie is, it goes against the grain of a lot of Disney movies, which are, why would we cover them? Because they're, big, really well-known things. Some of them are absolute classics, cultural phenomenons even. So, the whole point is we're trying to do movies that are more obscure, fell through the cracks, and have some interesting stories behind them. So hopefully we did that tonight with Black Cauldron. I was really thrilled. I know it's a bit self-indulgent on my part. I wanted to talk about the stuff. I've been wanting to do this movie, but I don't know. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to be gained from it. So thanks a lot, guys. Not sure what next episode will be, but something completely different for sure. So until then, stay safe, and thanks a lot for being with us.
Hey, guys. Have a good one. Thanks for watching.
Peace.